Hello and welcome to my new anime podcast, Let's Otalku Bout Anime. Um, Welcome, we're talking about one of my favorite anime movies ever right now, which is I Want to Eat Your Pancreas. Now bear with me, I know it's a bit of a weird name, but it's not about cannibalism or Tokyo Ghoul or anything like that. So this movie is very good, I'm going to say that right off the bat. And I will be spoiling it in this podcast, so please watch it before you watch this. I can't make you, but we'll be talking about pretty much every aspect of the movie, so there's going to be spoilers. You can watch it on an anime film, a live action film, or you can read it. It's a novel, it's a manga, it's everywhere. But I can't seem to find the dub, so I'm not sure what's up with that. It supposedly came out in 2019, but as of now, it's summer 2020. I can't find it anywhere. But there's also supposed to be a sequel coming out soon, which of course I can't find anywhere either because I don't think it's out yet. But that's going to be called To My Father and to Someone in My Memories, which I'm pretty excited about. And I'll probably discuss what I think that might be about later on. So, first off, I'm just going to get out of the way what the title means. So, as I said, it's not about cannibalism or anything. It's about one of our characters, Sakura. One of her, I don't want to say beliefs, but something she looked up and found out. Which I'm sure is based off of a real life religion. I didn't really look into it myself, but there's really two meanings. So, one of them is that in the past, she says, she doesn't say anything else, she just says, in the past, um, if there's something wrong with your liver, you'd eat a liver. And if there's something wrong with your stomach, you'd eat a stomach. So that was supposed to cure you, right? And that's the first meaning, which, of course, seems to be more taken literally, where if you eat someone or eat something from somebody, you will heal that limb or organ or whatever, which doesn't really come into play, I must say. They don't eat any organs, luckily. But then there's the second meaning, which I think is much more important and prominent in the story, which is where if you eat someone, they live on within you, which again, kind of gory, kind of Tokyo Ghoul-esque. But that's, again, they don't do that literally. They kind of talk about how it's just taking a page out of someone's book, how it's kind of becoming like someone. So that's the meaning of the title, really. It refers to how how they're trying to take pieces of each other. They're trying to have each other live on in their memories and in the way that they are. So we'll get into a bit more of that later on. We're going to talk about different scenes, and I'll talk about how they kind of become more like each other as we go. But, oh, shoot, my notes are falling, sorry. But I really like this movie. So, first off, I'm just going to go over some of the, well, not first off, but I'm going to go over a few of the little things that I like about it. Some of the not meaty parts of the story, but just little graphics and soundtrack and everything. Well, soundtrack's pretty important. But graphics-wise, I really like the graphics personally. Some people say it's not as detailed as they like because they compare it to things like Your Name, for example, is a big one, and I think A Silent Voice also had pretty good graphics if I remember correctly. But I think from a studio, it's from Studio Voln, which to be fair I've never heard of until now. They might have done other stuff, but I haven't seen any. But from a studio that I haven't heard of, they did a really good job, I'd say. My expectations weren't crazy high, and it is a little simplistic at times. Some of the scenes just don't have the detail that you would see in a lot of those other movies. But I think they really got the job done. I really like a lot of the lighting, personally. There's some scenes, I'll mention them later, that just have awesome lighting, awesome, like, weathering almost. That's not the right word, is it? But, like, awesome weather, awesome lighting, and awesome, just shading. Something about the color in this movie I just really like, because it seems so vibrant yet dark at times. Like, especially the hotel room I'm thinking of right now. But the character design as well, I think, is just really good. A little bit more on the simplistic side, but they all look very kind of unique in a way. Their hair is, generic anime hair, but at the same time, none of them really look too similar, I find. But the backgrounds are just amazing. I really like a lot of the setting. Actually, the second time I went through this movie, I just took screenshots of things that I was like, dang, that's a cool looking scene, because I don't know, maybe I'll use it as a screensaver, or maybe I'll put it in the video for a slideshow or something if I'm allowed to. But there's just little things that I really liked. And the backgrounds was one of those for sure. They had a great color palette for it as well, I must say. But the way they did like leaves, trees, plants, flowers, water, very well done. And as well as the animation, I noticed is very, very smooth. There's scenes where they'll move and it almost feels like kind of too human. It feels like they might have traced a video of someone moving, which they could have done. They could have very well done that, and I wouldn't have noticed. But it just really looks good. I think the way they make a lot of the little movements, little things like handing a book off to someone or hugging, they just feel very kind of weighted. They feel very weighted and realistic, whereas some things in anime are very exaggerated. They just feel a lot more down to earth, I should say. The soundtrack, on the other hand, is just crazy. It is way less down to earth. It is so good. I find the use of like piano. There's a lot of piano, and there's also these really good moments where like I'm not a huge music guy. Like I don't know what I'm talking about too much with this, but I think it's like a cello or a violin comes in sometimes, and it's just, oof, it just draws on you so hard. Something about it is so good. Whatever it is, I think it's cello. If anyone knows more about that, feel free to comment about it. But something about the music in this show, or in this movie, sorry, just really got me. And then there's little parts too where I'll talk about it more later. This might be a bit of a spoiler, but there's parts where it almost feels like it's reminiscing to a childhood, and it kind of feels more playful. And there's times when they're kind of feels like you're dancing around in space. It feels all over the place and sci-fi-ish, but not like a crazy amount. It doesn't sound like it's out of Star Wars. It just sounds very, I don't know, celestial is a good word for it, I think. Just the way the piano and harp and stuff might sound. Because there's some cool instruments in this as well, I found. The sound effects, on the other hand, I find the sound effects in this show were just pretty poorly done for the most part. One that comes to mind immediately is one point where, I'm going to do a little spoiler here, where Haruki gets slapped in the fucking face by Kyoko, and that slap just sounds so bad. Now, it might have been on purpose just to, I don't know, make it feel weak or something, but it just sounded really bad. It sounded like, I don't know, dropping a piece of ham on a table. It was not a very good slap, in my opinion. I would have liked to hear him get his shit rocked, kind of. I think that would have been funnier, but, you know, it's whatever. The rest of the show, I find there was pretty decent sound effects, but I mean, nothing to write home about. It's all kind of mediocre when it comes to the sound effects. What was it? There's something else I was going to talk about, and it's none of my notes. Anyways, the voice acting, on the other hand, though, is just, I thought was really, really good. They all had such unique voices that matched their characters so well. And when I talk about voice acting, too, I will be kind of getting into, like, the way they're scripted, the way they just, kind of the way they sound overall, I think. Like, for example, Sakura is very, like, cute and enthusiastic, but she also has a bit of a, like, mature undertone, which makes sense, because, you know, she's a young girl, she should be cute and enthusiastic, but she's at the same time, she's, another spoiler here, she's dying, so, you know, how enthusiastic can you be? So she kind of sounds mature at the same time, which is very interesting. But she's also very expressive. She talks fast, and then, you know, she lives fast too, so it kind of works. One other thing I've written in my notes is she says, "What funny?" Because there's a few scenes where she goes, "What?" in just a very funny way. I mean, it's in Japanese, but it's still just very funny moments, I find, that make me kind of giggle. Like a little schoolgirl. Haruki, on the other hand, is very contrasting to her. Like, he is just cold, monotone, he is quiet, he's reserved, and it just works so well in contrast to her character. And he seems to get more expressive as the movie goes on, which I love. It just, the character progression in Haruki is crazy. Now, they all have a bit of it, I'll say. They all have quite a bit of character progression, but his character just changes over and over throughout the movie. And you see it from scene to scene. You'll see things that he never would have done at the start, and you'll say, dang, this man is changing. And I love that. I love being able to hear that as it goes and feel the story kind of take shape. Now, there's other characters, like Kyoko, which, you know, they sound aggressive, and I think that works well. She sounds aggressive the whole movie, which I think is very good, because as much as her character progresses and she's, like, in a very short period of time, well, what we think is a short period of time, it's a year later, but it cuts out. she befriends Haruki, right, at the end. This is spoilers again, sorry. I'm just going to say it now. The rest of this will be spoilers, so. She befriends Haruki, right? Or he befriends her, whatever way you want to talk about it. But she always just has this aggressive sounding voice. She sounds kind of defensive, and that's just her character, and I like that. At first I thought maybe it's just because she's talking to a stranger throughout the movie, but even when she's friend with him for a year, it's still a very defensive tone that she carries, which I think works really well. And she also just sounds very kind of broken almost after the big twist that happens with Sakura, the big death. Now, one of my favorite characters here, he's kind of a bit of a plot device more than anything, but Gumboy is what he's referred to as on the wiki, I believe. It's just a cheerful, pleasant guy, and he's very expressive too, like Haruki. And he just kind of is there whenever he wants to be, I guess. He just shows up and offers Haruki gum, and I think he's an awesome character. I loved him. I thought he was a very interesting way to show how Haruki kind of becomes more friendly with them. But he's very expressive too, and just kind of cheerful and joyful, which I like. And then there's characters like Takahiro. He is... I don't even know where to start with that guy. He's the worst. And he, like, you know, he's angry and yells and screams or whatever. And then the next scene you'll see him, or not even the next scene, the next word he says, he'll be like, "Oh, hello there." He'll just be the kindest, innocent boy, or he'll try to sound like it. But he's just a two-faced fucking asshole. I hate that guy. Anyways, those are the main characters I wanted to really go over. But I'm going to start here. I'm going to start discussing scenes. So I'm just going to go through the movie. Not the whole thing, don't worry. Well, not every scene, I should say. But I'm going to go through, like, beginning to end of scenes throughout the movie and just kind of discuss a few things that stood out to me, a few scenes that I really liked. There is quite a lot, so, I mean, if you're only interested in the ending, maybe skip to further along in the video, because I really like the ending. The ending happens, or I call it the ending. It's the last half of the movie, I should say. It's just a lot of interesting scenes start plopping up. So if that's what you're here for, you know, skip maybe to the halfway point in this video. I'll probably take a long time, I imagine, discussing a few of the later scenes, so maybe before the halfway point, but if that's what you're interested in and you don't care about this stuff, that's alright, I understand. But I'm going to be discussing right from the beginning, the first scene we see, and that is Sakura's funeral. So I think that is just crazy to start off the movie on her funeral, and I think that was a really good choice at the same time. When I first saw it, I was like, what? You can't just tell us she dies. Like, what's the twist, you know? We know she's gonna die. What's the movie about then? Is it about how she dies? Is it about her living before she dies? Is this the end of the movie we're seeing at the start? But it's very well played out, I think, once they tell us that she's sick and we assume, you know, she's gonna die because she's sick. She's gonna have her pancreas give out. Or, I don't know how that disease works, but something like that's gonna happen, right? And it just doesn't. It flips on us, and another big spoiler, we're getting into that now, she just fucking gets stabbed in the middle of the street in the chest and dies within, like, minutes. And that was fucking crazy. That was a huge surprise to me. I never would have thought that until I started seeing the foreshadowing of the stabbings on the news and things. And I think showing the funeral at the beginning really kind of drove that home. That really showed us, okay, we know she's going to die, unless they do time travel or something. She's going to die. But it almost doesn't seem real that she would die in that way, which is awesome, because that's really how the characters would have felt. They would have felt like it just doesn't seem real, because that's how death is. It never does feel real, does it? But I really liked that. I really liked that scene. I think that really made us kind of build our walls. I've heard someone refer to it. I watched a video on it at one point, and they said, like, it starts to build up your walls as you see that she's going to die. You don't want to get attached to the character, which is interesting, because that's how Haruki is as a character. He doesn't want to get attached to anyone, and I think that's a really good way of kind of getting us into his shoes. And we don't sorry, voice crack, we don't want to care about that character, sorry, but we do as the movie goes on. And that's the problem, is we start to care about her more and more every scene she shows up, because she's such a likable character the whole time, pretty much, and our walls just crumble. and we think, oh, I can't like this character, and then she'll do something cute or she'll do something sweet to Haruki or something, and we'll go, damn, I fucking love this character, you know? And then they give us the old crotch kick and kill her off, so it sucks. And speaking of crotch kicks, that's a scene coming up. But right before that, there is or actually, I guess that's after it, isn't it? So we're on that now. I'm skipping around, by the way. So Sakura fucking kicks a guy's balls into his throat, which I love. I think that's a great way of showing that Haruki is, I wouldn't say scared, but he's just unconfrontational. He sees a fight or an argument going down. He says, let's walk around. And she goes, fuck no, I'm gonna beat some ass. And she goes up and she just kicks the shit out of that guy's dick, like, with no hesitation, pretty much. And I love that. It shows just how much of I don't want to say expressive character, but she's just so almost whimsical. She just does things when she thinks she should. She's like, you know what? I'm gonna kick this guy in the balls today. It's not what I went out to do this morning, but it's what I'm doing. And I love that about her. I think that's very, very cool how they do that. And that also kind of makes me wonder if maybe, since she is confrontational, maybe she got herself killed when she got stabbed. Maybe she saw the guy and recognized him from the news. Maybe she saw someone else being attacked and jumped in, which makes me really wonder, like, how did she die? Because we don't really see. We hear she was found with a stab wound on the chest, and we put two and two together. They tell us the culprit was found. But we don't really know what led up to that moment. Was she just stabbed out of nowhere? One second she's there, the guy walks by, stabs her, and leaves? We don't know. So, for all I know, I like to kind of think that maybe someone else was being harassed by the stabber, and she got in the way, and he stabbed her, because she would be the character to do that, as we hear in this scene. Which is very interesting. Haruki, on the other hand, or Haruki, I don't really know how to pronounce it, would not have done that, as we see in this scene as well. He says, I'll just walk around, But she kicks the shit out of that guy's balls, right? Love that scene. And next thing they know, they're at this cafe. They find themselves in front of Spring Cafe, or Cafe Spring. I think it's actually Cafe Spring. But they talk about or Sakura talks about how this just goes so well with her name, because Sakura is, a type of tree with blossoms that blossom in the spring. And those are those big pink trees, if you've ever seen them in pictures and stuff. The big pink cherry trees, I think they're called cherry blossoms, which she's named after. But Cafe Spring, she just says is perfect, which is interesting because, Haruki's name is Spring Tree, or it means spring tree, which is a bit of interesting foreshadowing where she says, it's spring, it's perfect, or she says, this place is perfect for me. Spring goes hand in hand with Sakura cherry blossoms, right? And that's just interesting because it kind of shows how, he's spring as well, so he goes perfectly hand in hand with her, as we find out later. So the next scene I'd like to discuss is when they're in the classroom, the next classroom scene. This is a cool scene because it just introduces all the characters that we come to love throughout the story, or hate, I should say, but a few of the side characters that we come to love. So it's interesting because the first time we see this scene starting, Haruki is walking through the halls and everyone's just whispering, talking about him behind his back, saying, oh, he's coming, that's the guy, whatever. They're talking shit about my man Haruki because people saw him with Sakura. Almost said Saruka. People saw him with Sakura and they're talking about it and they're gossiping, and this is exactly what he hates, He hates when people talk about him or confront him. And that's what's happening because of her. That is probably why he starts to be upset at her for a bit. But that wears off fast, don't worry. But the first character we see the first significant character we see here is Kyoko. Now, Kyoko is actually one of my favorite characters, I'd say. She's very interesting. She's the kind of the aggressive, defensive character that's best friends with Sakura, sorry. I don't really know how to pronounce it again, sorry. But she's like her best friend. She stands up for her. She's been there since junior high, I think that she says. And she's super defensive. And she's saying, what are you doing with this guy? You could do so much better, right? She's on her tail about it, saying, you're not dating him, are you? And all that. And then one thing I noticed that's kind of interesting is when her other friends are saying, oh, you could do so much better. You should be a Takahiro. she kind of watches Haruki and she looks at him and we see her expression. It doesn't seem like she's angry at him, but kind of like she's analyzing him. Like maybe she's thinking, what does Sakura see in him? Or is he worth it? Can he be trusted? And I think she's just kind of thinking where the other friends might have been more, oh, he's way too boring. He's going to bring your reputation down. Kyoko is probably sitting there like, whatever makes you happy. But I don't know this guy. I don't trust this guy yet. Can I trust him? And she's kind of analyzing him, which I think is very interesting and brings another layer to her character. And another character we see here, my favorite boy, Gumboy, sits down right next to him, which is awesome. I think that right away is great because no one sits near him in this whole scene. He's sitting off in the corner, kind of just minding his own business, reading a book like he does. And Gumboy just walks up and sits in the desk beside him, or in front of him, I guess, technically. And I think, at first, I'm not gonna lie, at first I was like, uh-oh, this guy's about to bully him, he's about to pick on him. But he says, so what's with you and Sakura, kind of thing, right? He goes up and he asks him, bro talk, what's up with this? Are you dating? What's going on? And at first I thought, this guy's gonna rat on him, this guy's gonna make fun of him for thinking he's good enough, whatever. And I just thought he was gonna bully the crap out of him because, I don't know, I didn't know the character, and he kind of looked like he was gonna bully him with that haircut. No, but he does look kind of like some anime bullies I've seen. But he sits down there, and he's got this big smile, and that's when I started to think, maybe not. And he's just, throughout the scene we see, he is just such a, I want to say a Chad, like all those memes, but he's just such a cool guy. He's kind, he's caring, thoughtful, and he's just so much unlike the rest of the class. The rest of the class is saying, who is this guy? Why is he with Sakura? What's up with that? Are they dating? He just walks up and he says, hey, how are you doing? Are you with Sakura? Like, he's asking, he's curious as well. But I think he's more curious about him than he is about their relationship with Sakura. He's just seeing how he is, because no one really talks to this guy. They probably don't even really know him by name. But Gumboy, of course, sits down, and he offers him gum, and he talks to him. And I love that. And I just think that's a very good way to introduce that one character that kind of is there throughout the story, hanging out with them. Not hanging out with them, but just kind of one of the people I would have expected him to make friends with before anyone else, which is kind of surprising with Kyoko being the one he'd be friends first, I'd say. But, he starts to open up to him, which I'll talk about that scene again later. But I love seeing Gumboy. And then the man of the hour, Takahiro, walks in, and everyone's like, ooh, it's Takahiro, right? Hate that guy. Oh my god, I hate that guy. He walks in, and he offers Sakura a CD that he found, and she's like, awesome, thanks, you're cool. And he gives her a CD that is apparently like one of her favorite bands, and it's a rare CD, whatever. And she's like, oh, cool, thanks. And everyone says, wow, that was cool. You should be with him instead of this guy. And they just go right back to fucking dicking on Haruki, right? Because no one seems to like him for no reason, except for that he doesn't talk to people. Which I'm sure a lot of us can relate to because, we watch anime. I watch anime. I don't talk to too many people. I guess that's just how it goes. Who knows? Or at least I used to not talk to people. But they go back to dicking on Haruki as Takahiro is kind of praised, and they talk about how awesome he is and how he's the ideal boyfriend or whatever. Which is kind of interesting because I looked it up later, and apparently his name means valuable and noble. So he's like, I don't know, like a knight kind of. But his name is just alone. When you just hear the name, it means valuable, noble, important, better than everyone else. And it's just kind of interesting how like significant that name is on its own. It's almost like they thought of the character and said, cool, what name can we give him to make him feel important too? And then they did. So kind of interesting that they just go ahead and call him that, because he really is what the class considers to be valuable and noble and stuff. They all consider him to be the best guy there, and everyone's talking about how popular he is. They're all gathering around him and stuff. And I think that's interesting because we see him compare himself to Haruki and say, what does she see in you later and everything. And it's interesting to see her say, I don't give a fuck about you, Takahiro. This guy's cool. To the guy who everyone seems to hate, and to the guy who everyone seems to love, about the guy that everyone seems to hate, which is very interesting. And just kind of shows how Sakura sees the good in Haruki and the bad in Takahiro, who was just a deeply awful character, I'd say. And then one of the next important scenes, skipping around a bit again, one of the next important scenes that I really like is the beach scene. Now, no, I'm not saying, oh, I love this beach episode of this show. No, not bikinis, nothing like that. It's just them walking on the beach. Don't get the wrong idea if you haven't seen the movie. But I love this scene. The lighting is gorgeous. The setting is gorgeous. The way they show, like, a footprint in the sand with the water going over it is just really well done. I'm sure Your Name probably has scenes like that are better. I don't really remember. I haven't seen it in probably a good year or two. But damn, that one scene where you see, like, the footprint get washed over with water was crazy. I've been saying that a lot this episode, haven't I? But I just love seeing that one scene and seeing the lighting alone in this episode. That was one of the things that made me think, okay, I need to talk about the lighting and the backgrounds that go on in this show, as well as the animation too, because there's some really interesting ways that Sakura kind of like walks and skips and prances around on the sand. It just feels very interesting. I love the movements that happen. Sorry, I just spilled my water on myself. But yeah, Haruki asks her why she hasn't told Kyoko about her illness, right? And she says, in contrast to the doctors, her family only gives her this kind of fake feeling of, no, you're not dying, you're fine. And they just kind of give her this normalcy that, like, nothing happened. And, of course, if you're dying and people are like, do the dishes, nothing's different, you're going to school, whatever, it's probably going to feel weird because you're doing the same thing as before. It's the same life, but now you know you're doing it on a timer. You'd want to probably go out and do all kinds of crazy stuff that you would never have done before. You want to go out and see Disneyland, whatever, go to Japan, go to Europe for the first time, whatever. And her family is just the opposite, and they're just faking it, pretending she's not dying. And then, of course, the doctor's the opposite, where they're saying you're dying, you're on a time limit, take medicine, whatever. And she's interested, and she says she doesn't want to, she's not interested, I don't know why I said that. She talks about how Kyoko would probably be like her family, where she pretends it's not real, or she'd cry every time she sees her, and that would be no fun, right? Like, she talks about why she doesn't talk. And I think that's an important scene, because if they didn't explain her thinking, we would just think, oh, Sakura's kind of an asshole. She didn't tell her best friend she's dying, and now she's dead, whatever. But they explain it, which I like. They kind of tell us why. And that also gives us more reason for Haruki not to tell Kyoko about it. Because we kind of need some, because he lives throughout this, and she gets angry at him for not telling him. But after seeing this scene, we can kind of understand that he probably was thinking of her first. He thought, okay, Sakura doesn't want her knowing. Who am I to go tell her, right? Like, it would just be the wrong thing to do, I think. And again, it's a debatable choice for Sakura to not tell Kyoko at all. And I think she probably should have. But I think Sakura probably would have told her later is what she was planning. But, of course, she didn't get to later, apparently. Sadly. But I think that's okay of a decision for her to not tell her, at least till later, because then they can have more time being together as friends normally, which is valuable time when, like, after you find out you're dying, I'm sure thinking of the times before are all going to seem very fond memories. You're all going to see, like, damn, I should have taken that for granted. And I think she doesn't want to have those yet. She doesn't want to tell her that she's dying, because then every moment will kind of feel forced, I think. And that's okay for her to think, I think. But I do think she should have told her at some point, which she probably was planning on. But, you know, that's up for discussion again. That's kind of just how I feel on the subject. I think it could be different for anybody. Anyone could have a different take on that. And I can respect both sides of the argument there. But after they talk about that a little bit, there's this interesting scene where Haruki walks up behind her when she's looking at the sand or looking at sea glass or something, and just says, "Are you really dying?" And she says, "Sure am," like in the most Sakura tone ever. Like, that really shows her character there too, where she's just kind of accepted it and is joking about it and stuff now. She's just kind of living life, you know? But she does know she's dying. She is accepting that. But that's an interesting scene for Haruki at the same time, because this is the first time you kind of see him start to care, I think. This is the first time you see him ask her about her dying, I think. Like, since he found out in the hospital waiting room. And in that scene, he said, you know, I'm dying. Or she said, I'm dying. And he said, Wait, what did he say? He said, like, no really or something. No shit, huh? Fuck. I have it written down in here. What the hell was that? There it is. Nope, that's not it. Where the hell is that scene? Anyways. Oh, right, I remember. It's you don't say. I just thought that was kind of funny, that one part. She says, my pancreas is failing and I will soon die. And he says, you don't say. And then the Seinfeld theme plays. Oh, no, that part doesn't actually happen. I wish. But that's just the first time he sees her. He says, you don't say. He doesn't seem to care, or he doesn't want to care. And in this scene, he's saying, are you really dying? Now, this could be taken a few ways. This could be thought of as, he's like, you're not acting like you're dying. You're laughing, you're jumping, you're playing in the sand. Are you really dying? Are you pranking me? But it also could be taken as, are you really dying? Are you really going to leave after this, like, awesome life? Because he might be starting to realize that she's the best thing that happened to him. He might be starting to open up to her. We don't really know too much at that point. I'd like to think he is, because it seems like it, but at the same time, he very well could also just be questioning how she can still be so happy when she's dying, because that's probably a foreign subject to him. We don't know if he's dealt with death much before. But it's just a very interesting dialogue that they have. Anyways, and then she sits down on the bench or whatever. They sit down and talk for a bit, and she talks about how she wants to make the most of the summer, because it could be her last, you know. She wants to make the most of the summer. She wants to have a summer romance or whatever. And Haruki says, so in other words, you want to have a boyfriend. And she just goes, vows silence, doesn't talk for a bit. And he it's kind of funny. He sits there for a second, then goes, wait a minute, she didn't respond. And looks over and asks what's wrong. And she just says, if I said I wanted a boyfriend, would you do something about it? Before brushing it off after. And she goes, she goes, you're gravely mistaken if you think there's a purpose to everything I say, right? But, I'm analyzing the story. I gotta know what the purpose is. I do have to think there's a purpose in everything they say, because that's kind of what I'm doing today. But it's just kind of an interesting question, because it could mean, like, would you do anything about it? She could be saying, would you start to love me? Would you start to try to date me? In which case, that could be a good or bad thing. She could be saying, don't ruin this. Don't try to become my boyfriend. I like what we have now. Or she could be saying, would you date me if I said that? Or maybe she's wondering if he'd want to risk it because he knows she's dying. He wouldn't want to be her boyfriend because he's going to lose her, maybe, As one quote from The Little Princess, which I'm going to be discussing at the end, by the way. I did actually look through the book and everything. I read an audiobook or whatever, you listen to an audiobook, so I'm going to discuss the comparisons. But as they say in The Little Prince, flowers are ephemeral. I think it's ephemeral. Yeah. Flowers are ephemeral, which is just an interesting way of saying she's going to die. She's not permanent. If he makes her his girlfriend, it won't be for that long, It won't be to be married. It won't be to have kids. It'll be for a moment. It'll be for a year, 2 years maybe. Which might be what she's hinting at, is that she does want to date him, but she doesn't want to put him through the pain of losing a girlfriend. Which, of course he's going to hurt either way, but it might hurt more. Who knows? So it can really be taken either way as well. I think she's kind of saying, I don't want to ruin this. I don't want to date. But it also could very well be that she doesn't want to hurt him more when she leaves, which I think would be interesting too. And I'm starting to lean towards that side of the debate of what that can mean. I'm starting to lean towards her not wanting to hurt him, because it seems throughout the story, as much as she tries to make him make friends, she also tries to get him out of his shell with other people, not just herself, which means I think she's just out there to kind of try to get him to socialize and stuff, but she doesn't want him to fall for her too much. Like, as much as she might want her to selfishly kind of in her mind, she might think she's bad for it, but I don't think overall that she wants to hurt him when she leaves, if that makes sense. Now, the next scene I want to get into is the next classroom scene. So this one's a little bit more subtle, and he's watching Sakura, which is kind of interesting. He's not reading. I guess he can't read. He's cleaning the classroom. He's cleaning a window. But he's sitting there cleaning, and he takes a break and just watches Sakura clean off a chalkboard as she's getting invited to karaoke or whatever. And that's kind of interesting, because he never used to take interest in people other than, himself or his books or whatever. And sure, it is Sakura, the big star of the movie, but it is also someone else. It's not himself. which we start to notice throughout the movie. He takes interest in her, and then after that, he starts branching out and taking interest in other people and everyone, which is interesting because this is kind of the first step in taking interest in people at all for him that I noticed. And then my boy, Gumboy, waltzes up, Chad style, and says, what's up, you know? Hey, what's up, hello. And then they talk again. He says, you sure you're not dating Sakura? Whatever. It seems like he's prying again, kind of, at first glance, but I don't think so. I think he's just trying to make small talk. But at one point he says, don't tell me you think I'm asking because I like Yamauchi, I think it is. That's way off. See, I'm into more refined girls, right? Like, he's just the connoisseur of fine women, you know, before being kicked in the ass by Kyoko. So I love that. A lot of funny kicks in this show. But she just kicks his shit in, right? And he does the funniest groan, too. Which is funny timing as well. He says, I'm more into refined girls. And then, you know, his future refined girl kicks into his asshole with her boot, you know. But kind of funny how she sneaks up behind him and just kicks him. And we see, you know, there's something between them. It doesn't seem too good at first, but, you know, I think it's more of a friend kick than a actual aggressive kick. I think they're on friendly terms, which, you know, they'll soon become more than friendly terms, if you get what I mean. Soon being in a year, I guess. But I think that's an interesting scene, because he's kind of saying, sure, he says, I'm into more refined girls. I don't think that's a roast on Sakura. I think that's more of a, don't worry, man, I'm not trying to steal your girl. Just kind of to make him not think he's a threat or whatever. To kind of, I think, ease his suspicions, because he probably thinks Haruki loves her or wants to date her or something. Which, for all we know, maybe he does. He starts to seem like it, you know? And then, after Kyoko kicks his ass, excuse me, and threatens Haruki for his own ass kicking, and then walks away, you see Sakura kind of motioning at him in sign language almost, to be friendly and smile at them and talk to them. And then they'll be friends, you know, and everyone will live happily ever after. And he just kind of sighs, which is kind of funny. And I think that shows her character very well, too, where she's trying to encourage him to branch out and make friends and like people, you know? Now we're starting to get to one of my favorite scenes. This isn't it yet, but this is leading up to it for sure. And this is the train ride, you know, to Hakata City. So, not too much happens on the train ride, to be honest. But they do discuss his name, which is a very important plot point. They don't tell us a lot about it until later in the show, where they go back and say, this is something that happened, but you didn't hear it because of the train horn or whatever. Because they blurred it out in this scene. But she gets his last name, or checks that his last name is written correctly, I should say. And then he asks her not to write it in the book. She says, screw you, I'll do what I want. It's my book, you know. And then she writes it in, you think, at first, and asks how to spell his first name, or what his first name is, I should say, because she doesn't even know it at that point, which I want to bring up. Very interestingly enough, I didn't even notice at this point that we didn't know his name at all. I just kind of, like they were meaning you to, filled in with that character and kind of felt like I was part of Haruki. I didn't think of his name at all. I didn't even notice that we didn't know it. Like, again, I should mention, a lot of times when I'm watching anime, I won't know half the characters' names if I don't care about them. But I liked Haruki as a character, yet I still didn't know his name. I thought it was just something I missed, but looking back, they never mention it until the end of the movie. And they blend it very well. They scripted it very, very well to keep that out, I think. But he tells her his first name, right? And conveniently enough, the train pops its whistle or whatever. It does a loud noise or goes through a tunnel, I think. And we don't hear it. So we see her smile, I think, after. We do later, at least, for sure. But we don't see why. And that's because he tells her his name is Haruki, and she realizes, Spring Tree? What the fuck, bro? This is just meant to be, you know? Sakura Blossom and Spring Tree. It's basically the same shit. It's the same thing. Which I might talk about a bit more, because they do bring it up later. But that's just a very interesting way that they said, hey, you don't know this guy's name, and you're not gonna. And and I was like, shit. Okay, guess not. But they did that really well, I thought. It was very well blended for the first, I think it's like maybe 45, half an hour into the movie. And they don't say his name once, which I didn't even notice. So very good scripting on that. And then, they arrive at Hakata City. They do a bunch of very date-like things. They go shopping. They eat food together, all kinds of stuff. They have a fun time. And then they get to the hotel. Now, this is my favorite scene coming up, but Sakura goes up to the front desk, right? And you just hear her say, "What?" again, in that funny way that I was mentioning earlier. Because the hotel went and, wingmanned him and fucked up the rooms, and they end up in the same room with one bed. So this kind of something that I'm a little suspicious about, if that was actually planned or not on her part. I don't think the hotel would have planned it, but maybe she was like, one bed? Okay, because we later learned that, she's trying to catch that Haru D, if you get my drift, But it could have very well been planned, I think. She very well could have just said, "You know what? How about this? How about you give us a better room, cooler room? But, one bed's fine, I guess. I won't mind, I guess. If you say I have to, whatever." So, kind of interesting how that works out, because we don't really see the discussion. We just hear the answer, the point they come to, or whatever. Sorry, my voice is going out, I think. Oh, and I forgot to mention, too, before they get to the hotel, we actually hear on the news again, or not on the news this time, but they mentioned the story that was on the news. Sakura mentions that there has been stabbings recently, right? And it's not that safe to be outside or whatever, and it's like, damn. That sucks, because, the second time watching that, hearing those things and just saying, fuck, that's probably the same guy out there on the streets that stabbed her, like, almost certainly. The same serial killer or whatever, out here stabbing chests. Fucking, hate that guy. Don't even know him. Probably Takahiro for all I know. Fuck that dude. But, they mentioned that, foreshadowing again, which I think is really good. I think it's nice that they have those little stories, and they're not too obvious. They kind of are. I think they could have been maybe a bit more discreet, but at the same time, I think they kind of did a decent job. It didn't seem very overwhelming. It was just, 2 scenes before and then the death. And I think the first scene especially, where it's just on the news in the background, seems pretty normal. This one, where they bring it up in person, it's kind of a little bit less discreet. It's a lot more explicit how they say, people are being stabbed, we should watch out, and then they get stabbed. Or she gets stabbed, I should say, not Haruki. But it's kind of a little bit maybe too out in the open, I think. But at the same time, I think that's alright. I didn't really mind it the first watch. The second and third watch, I was a little bit less happy with that conversation they had, but, I think it's okay. Anyways, back to the hotel room. Now, there's this cute little scene where they walk in the door. He's carrying all the baggage for them both, and she kind of twirls around the room and flops on the bed and says she's nervous to sleep in the same bed as you. And he just goes, "Bro, you stupid? I'll be sleeping over here on the couch." Because he's an absolute Chad, And she goes, "What?" again, in her Seinfeld theme way. I don't know. Because, she was probably trying to fuck him. We hear later that that she was really wanting to bang someone that wasn't her boyfriend and that she wasn't in love with, which at the time was him. I do think she falls in love with him, but that's another discussion that we might have later. But yeah, he's terrible at picking up hints. He's like, "Okay, I'm gonna sleep on the couch now." And she hops in the shower, teases him about being naked, that kind of thing. At one point, though, he reaches in her bag to get her soap for her, because he asks her, nothing creepy. She asks her to get her soap, face wash, I think it is. And he sees a bag full of medicine. We don't see till later what it was, but it's just a bag full of medicine, needles, syringes, bunch of pills, tablets, that kind of thing. And it's kind of like one of those moments where he realizes, shit, this girl is dying, isn't she? She's really, I think he kind of starts to forget throughout the movie that she's metaphorically on her deathbed. She's dying within probably 2 years, I think was the estimated time. But, he notices the medicine, And yeah, he kind of forgets about it for a second. I think he hops in the shower. I believe is the next scene we see. He hops in the shower and then comes out, and Sakura says, "Hey, I got drinks with getting litty tonight. Woo woo." And then, they do. Actually, she doesn't say that, I should mention. She gives him a drink, he drinks it and says, "What the fuck, bro? This is just not apple juice." And she's like, "Yeah, okay. So what? You gonna wuss out?" And he says, "Hell no." I'm paraphrasing naturally. But she tricks him into drinking once, and then he says, "You know what, too far gone now, might as well just drink it." Whatever. He's in it now. And they play Truth or Dare, right? So this is one of my favorite scenes. It's a very cute little scene where they just play Truth or Dare together, and it starts off as her saying, "It's funny little questions. I was prepared to tell you my measurements," is one line she says. Because she's very flirty and teasy in these scenes in the hotel, which again I think leans towards the fact that she was probably trying to fuck him. But my man's wasn't having any of that shit. He wasn't having it. But they play Truth or Dare, and I must say, I really like this scene. It's kind of more personal for me why I love this scene. I think having this scene was a very good way for them to connect very quickly, because personally, a little side story, me and my girlfriend, when we were first starting to get to know each other, we would play games kind of like Truth or Dare. We'd just try to think of the most awkward questions and answer them, right? Just to kind of try to fast track us knowing each other, to kind of bond quickly, because I find that really works for that. And I think that's interesting that they had that happen in the show as well, that they got together and they played 10 rounds of Truth or Dare, and she was like asking all these funny questions, and he goes, "What are your hobbies? Saddest time you've been in your life, or saddest thing that's happened to you in your life, happiest thing that's happened in your life," and all these like deeper questions. I think that's really interesting. Sakura does not. She gets bored as shit within like 7 questions. And I think it's worth mentioning too, we only hear 9 questions, which is kind of sus. Not sure what that 10th was, or if it's maybe wasn't important, if it was a big question that they wanted to leave out for a plot hole or something. I don't know what it could have been. Maybe just to cover their backs, if they needed it to fill a plot hole, is what I was thinking. Or maybe it was a secret question, you got to guess what it is. I have no idea. But I counted it like 6 times, and I'm pretty sure there was only 9 questions, unless one of them was a double question, but I don't think it works like that. But the first one, of course, is Sakura saying, "Who do you think is the prettiest girl in class, or the cutest girl in class?" And he says, "This nerdy math girl, right? Because he knows what he wants, and he wants a nerdy girl, a nerdy goth GF." But she's like, "Oh, Hina, so that's the girl you like." And she pauses, which is kind of interesting, because I think she might be like kind of comparing herself and be like, "I think this fucker thinks I'm cute. What the hell?" But, next question she asks is, where would she rank her? And he says 3rd, and she blushes and freaks out. So I think that was kind of a cute little way of showing her, being like, "Oh my gosh, really?" Because she does that a few times. She says, like, "You have to compliment me now," and then he compliments her, and she freaks out. Like, kind of funny. Just a very interesting thing for a character to have like that. I don't know, it feels very cutesy and almost immature and young, which is interesting because she's one of the more mature characters out there, just because she's coming to terms with death, but at the same time she acts. Sorry, I'm losing my words. She acts so young and playful and stuff at the same time, which again, I was talking about how her voice is mature and stuff. It's the same with her personality. She's very mature because she's coming to terms with death, but at the same time she's like very spontaneous and silly and everything. But I just love this scene. And then my favorite part is when she says at the end, she finally gets her turn, because the way they play Truth or Dare, it's different than I've ever played, but they play with a circle of cards. You pick a card, or you both pick a card, highest one wins or whatever, and then they ask the question. I've only ever played with, you play turns or whatever, you go in a circle, who knows. But yeah, she finally gets to ask a question. She got the first 2, and I don't think she got anything till the last one, or the 2 last ones, I should say. And she says, "Yay!" and falls on her ass, because she's definitely drunk at this point, I'd say. And she gets him to carry her to the bed or tell her 3 things that are cute about her. And he's like, hell no, I ain't doing that. So he carries her, and he does this cute little bridal carry. And now this is like I don't know, a 14-second sequence, I'd say. 10 seconds, 14, 15. I don't know. It's pretty long for a carry. But I think that was really good because it just shows how, they're doing these rapid fire truth or dare questions, talking, having a fun time, drinking, and then they pause and he just carries her to bed slowly, quietly, and she just kind of looks up at him. And I think there's an interesting part where she kind of puts her arm around her arm around his neck, and she just kind of timidly moves her other one up and kind of cozies in slowly and shyly. And then she's like looking up at him and kind of looks down and blushes and smiles and stuff before he finally sets her down on the bed after a long kind of awkward feeling sequence, which is good because that probably was a bit of an awkward moment for them. But he sets her down. She rolls around and says, "I can't believe that happened," and it's just a cute scene. And then he leaves immediately and he goes to get water and stuff. And then they get to the last turn, which is the 9th. It should have been 10th, whatever. And he draws her cards for her, and she gets asked the question, and she's kind of thinking of what the question's going to be for a bit. As he gets the water, turns off the lights, starts getting everything ready for bed, And there's one scene where you see her eye looking up at the ceiling, and she's like deep in thought, right? And then it's kind of interesting how they framed it and worked on the composition very well and everything to just not show us her face again until the next morning. This whole scene, you don't see her face at all. It's either cropped out or it's blurry or it's facing the other way. I think that's an interesting way of showing us how solemn she is, how like snapped down to earth she is from their little fun game of truth or dare. She's very down to earth thinking now, which happens to some people when they drink, and also would happen to her probably just because it's on her mind, and she asks her question, which is it's a bit of a heavy question, but she says, if I told you that I'm actually super scared of dying, what would you do? And he stops drinking his water. He was having a gulp of water, he's a thirsty boy. And he stops in the middle of his drink and he thinks and he remembers the medicine bag and stuff like that. And, I think he must have forgot for that scene, but he remembers she's dying. And I think that's one thing that comes throughout the movie is he starts forgetting a few times. And then remembers and then forgets and remembers. But he thinks about it for a second, and then there's this awkward pause, which I really think drives it home, and he just says, "Dare." And I love that. I think that was one of the most well thought out lines in this whole movie. I think that's my favorite scene. Like, this whole scene is awesome, but I really like that because it just shows how he thinks about it, and he says, "No way, he's not answering that," which is a very almost humanizing response for this character that seems to be so antisocial and sullen or whatever the word is, just very cold and stuff throughout most of the movie or the start of the movie. And he just says this very human avoiding-y line of dare, and I think that's awesome how they did that. And then she says, "Sleep in the bed with me, no arguing, no debate," and of course he doesn't want to have to answer that question, so he just goes along. And he lies there, and he sleeps awkwardly. And you see him, like, they're facing opposite directions, no cuddling or anything. They're about a foot apart. And he's facing the window, I think. But he looks there. You see him kind of look down for a second before he just closes his eyes. And he's probably thinking that night. He's probably thinking, damn, this girl's dying, isn't she? Because I think throughout this movie, you start to see him just slowly fall and fall and fall for her more and more. And that was one of those scenes that just hits really hard, But that's that whole scene. That's my favorite scene in the movie, so I might have taken a while to discuss it, but I love that scene a lot. That was one of the most beautiful scenes in this movie, in my opinion. And then we get another nice one on the way home, but before that, Kyoko calls in the morning, and she is not happy. So they discussed earlier their cover stories, which was Sakura said she was going to sleep at Kyoko's house to her parents, and Haruki said he'd call and lie about having friends, which is kind of a sad line. But yeah, the next day Kyoko called and says, "What the fuck? Your parents called me. You're not at my house. I said you were because they were asking, what's the deal?" and she asks, I think she says, "What are you doing going off alone like a dying cat?" Which is, kind of too real, too ironic of a line, Emperor Palpatine style, ironic. And then she says, "I'm not alone," and she goes, what? She's not happy when she finds, because she thinks, is it your boyfriend or something? Even though she knows she broke up with her boyfriend. Then she says, no, don't tell me you're with him. And she says, I'll explain later, basically. She basically just brushes it off. And Kyoko is not happy about that. Naturally, she's the defensive friend. She does not like Haruki, and they went off on a overnight trip. She ain't having any of it. So, she makes her list of demands for when she gets back. She wants a souvenir. She wants her home safe, and she wants her own trip with her, right? And she says, tell Haruki, if he does anything to you, he's fucking dead, And Haruki goes, I didn't do anything, I'm innocent. And Sakura says, that bridal carry says otherwise or something. So, Kyoko's out for blood now. And then we get that scene I was going to talk about, where they start, I almost said busing. They go on the train home again. And they're the only two on the train that you can see, I believe. It's a very nice scene, though, very nicely lit. Sunset scene, I like those a lot in movies, in anime especially. When you get those nice orange tone scenes. But they're kind of busing home awkwardly, and Sakura says, well, that went by fast, because that's how trips tend to go. And as Haruki starts to get off the train, she says, what does she say? I have it written down, I think. No, I don't have it written down, but I do have the one part. Basically, she says, you're being awfully honest, because he acts like he had a good time or whatever. Or I think she asks him if he wants to go on another trip in the winter. And he says, yeah, sure, or whatever. Yeah, that sounds good. And she goes, oh, that's awfully honest of you. Looks like you actually had fun. And he pauses for a second before smiling and said, yeah, it was fun. And she's just like, brain blast, she's wilding out. She goes, what? And she goes, what? As he slowly, or not slowly, but he turns around and just walks off the train. And then you see her kind of watching him out the window as he walks by, and she's smiling and thinking, damn, he's having a good time. He's starting to like me, or he's starting to be sociable. And I think that's very interesting in and of itself, that scene. But I think that's also one of the first times we see him have that smile on his face. Because I think he does smile a few times before that, probably. But that's one of the few times he just really, looks at her, smiles, delivers a line, and leaves, He's happy, and he's happy about being social. I don't think he touched a book the whole time he was there. Which is very different for Haruki, as we've seen. You see his bedroom, it's covered in bookshelves. You see him returning 20 library books at a time, I'm pretty sure, at one point. The man reads, But, I love that scene, too. I think that scene's really interesting, and it shows a lot of character progression. As I said, there's a lot of character progression between, all the characters, but Haruki especially. Just, you see him become so much more social, and as he starts to like Sakura and everything. And I just really like that scene for that, It just shows it really well. Then after we get a little scene where there's a little bit of a intermission or whatever before we get the next part or whatever, the next couple scenes, where you see the rest of the break, because they did this on I think it was a spring break or something, maybe a week off, who knows. I don't think it was an actual weekend though. But he realizes that he was reading or whatever, doing nothing all week, and he realizes he was waiting for him to contact her, or for her to contact him, I should say. Which is kind of interesting because, I'm sure he's not used to waiting for friends to contact them to go out sometimes and stuff like that. But he realizes he was waiting for her, which is also a bit of an interesting line because that's new to him. That's something he's never done. And it just shows how much he's changing and how much she's changing him. And then we get a few more scenes. We get a nice scene with Kyoko warning him not to do that again and to, not get close to him to her with half-baked feelings. To know what he's getting into and everything, which I think is a very interesting scene. But there's not much to talk about with that. And then, he's late for work, and Sakura mentions her favorite book, and and she says, I don't read, but I do have one favorite book, and he says, what is it, Or he doesn't ask, but she's like, you gotta be curious, there's no way, and he says, you know what, I'm pretty curious. So, she tells him it's The Little Prince, and I looked it up shortly after watching the movie, and this is a real story. And I'm not saying go out and read it. It wasn't a particularly amazing story. It wasn't bad. I liked it. I listened to an audiobook. It was about 2 hours longer than the movie, actually. It was not 2 hours longer, but it was like 2 hours long. But yeah, it was a bit longer than the movie, but I think it was worth it for some of the comparisons that I'm going to be talking about at the end of the movie, or at the end of the podcast. But she mentions that it's her favorite book, and he says, "Oh yeah, I've heard of that." And she goes, "What?" Because I think it's from France, I believe it's written. They say it's a foreign book, but it's a French book, so probably France. I don't think it's from Quebec. But she's kind of disappointed that he's heard of it, and says, "Oh, so you must have read it too." And he goes, "Actually, I haven't." And she goes, "Oh, you haven't? Well, then you have to come over to my house and you can borrow it." So she lures him over, and he bites. He takes the hook, and he goes over to her house. And she mentions that they're home alone and stuff earlier, so it's kind of sus. But they get there and they're playing video games, so it's a good time. He's gonna get himself a gamer GF, or he would have, not quite. But that actually kind of looks like they're playing a classic PlayStation by the controllers and stuff, and some kind of racing games on the screen. At first I thought it might have been Mario Kart, but that wouldn't make much sense. And she starts asking questions to him, right? And she says, "Don't you want to get a girlfriend at some point?" And he says, "I don't want to, I can't, and I won't." Because, he doesn't have friends at this point, let alone a girlfriend. Though he is starting to get one, I'd say. And she says, "You know what? Even if you don't get a girlfriend, you gotta get friends at least." And then after a bit, she thinks and she asks, "You'd never want me as your girlfriend, no matter what, right?" And he has this awkward thing where he's like, "What? What are you even saying?" And then she says, "I'm just making sure." And, he has this look on his face where he's like, "The fuck, bro?" Because she kind of just said, like, "You don't like me, do you?" "I hope not." And he's like, "Bruh." So he says, "No, I wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to make you my girlfriend." And she says, "Good to hear, that's a relief." And he's like, I think he's kind of boiling over the brim here. He seems even more pissed than the last scene. And he gets up after he dies in the game and he says, "Lend me that book so I can go home," kind of thing, right? And he goes and he stands and he looks at a bookshelf for a bit. And we see a bit of a look on Sakura's face as she sits there, and she gets up and she's thinking, and then she gets up and she walks and just hugs him from behind, and he drops his bags. He's shocked. You see on his face, he's got this expression. He almost seems horrified as she hugs him from behind. He just seems so uncomfortable the way he's being held and stuff. And then she whispers in his ear, "Hey, little mama, let me whisper in your ear," and tells him that she wants to fuck him, right? Not exactly. She says she wants to fuck someone who's not her boyfriend and who she's not in love with. And then she says, "I wouldn't mind if it was you, or if it's you, or whatever." And he's like, "Huh? Mom, help me, I'm scared." He ain't happy. She turns him around and she kind of gets ready to kiss him, and there's a very long build up, right? And he thinks, and what's the word? Kind of looks back and recalls the words Kyoko said to him not even maybe 5 minutes ago on that balcony, and he remembers how she said, where do I have it in notes? She basically says you have to someone has to be by her side and take care of her, and he's probably thinking, can I be that person? Can I take care of her and be by her side? And he seems to almost decide in his head, I can do this. And he clenches his fist, and he seems to kind of decide, you know what, I can do this. I can be here for her. I can be the one that Kyoko wants him to be, because Kyoko wants him to be if he's gonna hang out with her, he has to know what he's getting into. And he decides, I think either in his head he's either thinking he's betraying Kyoko's trust. Might have been the first one. He might be thinking, oh, Kyoko's gonna kill me, or he might be thinking, I can do this. I can be here for her. I can be her man, But he clenches his fist and he starts to lean back in for it too, a little bit. He starts to kind of go for it as well, and then this asshole Sakura just chuckles in his face and spins around and leaves and laughs and says, "Oh, I got you. Oh, I got you good," And it's interesting to say as well, there was no music in that scene. It was quiet. All you hear is their breathing. And then she just starts laughing at him. And he's sitting there, well, standing there against the bookshelf still. And he's thinking, bro, what the fuck? He's pissed. He ain't happy that she just kind of like played with his feelings, you know? And he's like, I think this scene, it could have very well, I think she did want to like go through with it, but she might have gotten nervous or might have gotten scared, might have changed her mind. Any number of things could have happened. I think that was just her way of brushing it off, was her laughing at him and saying, haha, I got you. Then again, it could have been an actual trick the whole time, but I think, like, she already knew he was upset, I'm pretty sure. I think she was, like, I think she knew what she was doing. I think she was going to try to go through with it, if you catch my drift. But she pulls away, probably because she's embarrassed or something, and tries to laugh it off. She says, oh, I got you good, whatever. You've been pranked, you know. She pranks him good. And he just says, what are you thinking? And, like, runs at her and pushes her on the bed and pins her down, which is getting a little sus. Very sus, actually. And at first she's confused. She's like, what? What are you doing? You going along with the joke? What's going on? And then he doesn't say anything for, like, the whole scene. He just breathes heavily in her face, which is, you know, awkward enough already. And she starts to get scared and, like, try to get loose and everything, tries to shake loose. She doesn't hit him or anything or kick him in the nuts, even though she very well could have rocked his shit again like she did with that last guy. But she's like, she's trying to get free, and then there's one part where she just says stop, and tears slowly like fall down her eyes, and Haruki kind of snaps back to it, and he realizes what he's doing, and he's like, shit, I'm a bad person. Like, he's realizing, no, that's terrible no matter what, like, it's a bad thing to do, you know. And he gets off and, like, jumps off the bed and just runs, grabs his bag and just runs out the door, like, immediately. And she lays there and cries for a bit. I think a few things are going through her head here, so it's worth mentioning earlier that she says her ex-boyfriend was overly persistent in ways, which I think could mean the worst. I don't think that's what it means, but, like, she's still on good terms with her ex at this point, so I don't think it means, you know, he forced herself on her or anything at one point. But I think he was probably way too persistent about that kind of stuff, which, of course, is absolutely fucking terrible. Like, I don't know how she'd be on good terms at all, so I'm not really too sure what that means. But she's either remembering that in this moment, or she's like, she might also just be thinking, damn, I really bullied that kid, huh? I pranked him good, you know? Or she was just scared, which is also very understandable. Like, there's a lot of stuff that's probably going through her head in that moment. So she lays there and she, you know, she cries for a few minutes, understandably. And we don't really hear exactly why. I think it was probably mostly because she was just scared, and maybe a combination of she was also felt bad for, you know, teasing him or whatever earlier. But it could have also been that she was remembering something about her ex-boyfriend, which I don't want to get too into, but just, it could have been a possibility. I think it's unrealistic that would have been what happened, but you never know. Maybe it was. Maybe it was just badly written for that part. But that's a sad-ass scene right there. And then, you know, he runs out the door, and you see him walking in the rain with his umbrella towards his house. And he doesn't even get to the road, like, he gets out of the driveway or whatever, down the path, and he doesn't even cross the first crosswalk as he runs into the man of the hour, fucking Takahiro again. Fucking hate that guy. And he's like, what are you doing here, you know? He's wondering why he's there and asks if it's because of Sakura and everything, and you can tell he's jealous as shit, because he is not happy with him. He's like, why would she spend time with you? Why would she like you? Whatever. And he's just like, we're not what you think we are. We're not what we think you are. And he's like, explain it then. And they fight, you know. They argue over that. Well, I shouldn't say they fight. Takahiro yells at him a lot, like a little man baby. And, you know, Haruki is like, nope, that's not what's going on. Nope, And then he finally kind of snaps and says, listen, let me clue you in on something. This is Haruki speaking. It might do you some good. Apparently, she doesn't like guys who don't take no for an answer. I hear her old boyfriend is like that. And Takahiro just loses his shit and just punches him right in the face immediately. Now, this is a better punch sound effect than the slap I mentioned earlier that sucked. But he just punches him right in the face, drops him to the ground, you know. And he's like, won't take no for an answer. What the fuck do you know? So that does lead me to believe that maybe he did do something. That's why I was kind of mentioning it earlier. Because if you didn't notice already, Takahiro is her ex-boyfriend. Which leads me to believe that maybe that happened. But at the same time, he offered her a CD earlier, and she's like, oh, thanks, dude. You're a great friend. Like she says later, he was a great friend, just a bad boyfriend. Which, I can't see being on friendly terms with someone after that. So it's kind of... It leaves you wondering at, like, to what extent. Like, what does he mean by can't take no for an answer? Because it really just doesn't tell us what we need to know. It doesn't tell us how much, like... I don't know. It just leaves a lot to be imagined there. And I've been thinking about that scene a lot, trying to think of what it could mean. And that's kind of what I came to, is maybe he pressured her too much into it. Either way, he's a fucking scumbag. He's a terrible person. But we don't see, like, to what extent. But at that point, they're still on good terms, so it's kind of confusing. But anyways, after he rocks his shit, punches him over, just as he does that, Sakura comes running around the corner and is like, what are you doing, step bro? No. She's like, what are you doing? And Takahiro just changes his voice and says, Sakura, good timing. I was just talking about you with him. As he's, like, bleeding from his face on the ground in front of him. And Sakura ain't buying it. She runs over and starts mopping up his blood on his face and stuff, tending to him, whatever. And Takahiro has this weird expression where he's like, horrified expression again. I don't want to use that again, but, he looks shocked, to say the least. And he's like, what are you doing with someone like him? He's been following you around and annoying you, so I took care of him for you and all that stuff. And Sakura's like, do you think you're better than him? Like, all that. And kind of shatters his worldview or whatever. Kind of makes him realize, shit, she likes him more than me, doesn't he? Or doesn't she? And then, Sakura says, fuck off, you're awful, I hate you. And he says this one line where he says, but I did it for your sake. And that line kind of makes me think, like, maybe he did genuinely think that Haruki was, like, stalking her or bothering her. But, like, I don't know. It leaves a lot to be thought there, too, because we don't see anything between Sakura and Takahiro other than, the CD exchange in this moment. So it lets us think, like, what was their relationship before? We don't really see any of what they were like when they were dating. We see their friendship at that one moment, but, like, even that, there's a lot that we just don't see. So I think we're not getting the full story. It's hard to tell what's going on, but either way, fuck Takahiro. All my homies hate Takahiro, Anyways, he gets her to leave, or she gets him to leave. And then she has this long thing with Haruki where she goes to tend to him. He slaps her hand away. And he talks about how she'd be better off without him, like with someone like him or Kyoko or someone that really cares about you, he says. Which is kind of a mean line, but he's pissed off for sure at this point. He's not happy. He's just having a bad day. And then Sakura gets into this long thing about how they met for a reason, She says, I don't believe it's fate, nothing like that. But she talks about how their choices brought them to this moment. The choices you've made up until this moment have brought us here, whatever. And they've all piled up to make this happen. And they all talk about that, right, for a bit. And then she eventually convinces him to stay. She says, I think, so for just a little bit longer, will you stay with me? And he's like, damn. Man, I love this girl, he said. No, but I think he really cares about her. And he's like, shit, I have to stay for her because, I think she really does have the best intentions. She definitely messed up, I think, at one point in there. Something she did wrong, either laughing in his face or trying it at all or something. And she, she apologized. She says, I'm sorry about it before, but I'm really happy that you're here now, And he forgives her. He says, well, he doesn't say it's okay, but, eventually he decides he'll stay. And she invites him over to get a change of clothes. He's covered in rain and blood and stuff now. And then he looks at her after standing up and says, thank you. And she's like, what? For what? And, then it cuts to the next scene. But that's just a kind of an interesting dynamic, because we don't really see them fight at all other than that one scene. They don't get into arguments or anything. They just seem to be, two peas in a pod kind of for the rest of the show. But then there's that little scene where they get into a bit of an argument, a bit of a an agreement. I don't know. It's just an interesting scene. I thought I'd discuss it, but there's a lot going on. It's kind of hard to tell where everyone stands in that scene. So Haruki goes over to her house. He gets changed into, likely, I think, probably her dad's clothes or something. It didn't look like he was wearing, I don't know, her skirt or something, but he had some sweatpants on, I think. So he gets changed, and she gives him the book, The Little Prince, to read for a year, and he says, I put books on my shelf in the order I get them, and I read them through, so it might take a while, you know. Then again, he's a fast reader, so probably not too long, and she just says, just get it back to me in a year, you know. Just the friendly, get it back to me in a year, whenever, it's not a big deal. And then that's one of the promises that he breaks, you know. It's pretty sad to see that part, because it's like, damn. Like it's not bad the first time, but the second time it's like, damn. He doesn't give her that book back, does she? Does he? And it's also kind of one thing worth mentioning is when he grabs the book, he has bandages on the tips of his fingers, which I don't know. He didn't throw any punches, so I don't really know what's up with that. Maybe he got road burn at one point when he like landed. But like all his fingers on his left hand, I believe, just have bandages on the tips, which I don't know what that's supposed to mean. I don't know if that's just an accident. Maybe he was supposed to throw a punch and they cut the scene or something. But I don't know, just something I noticed and thought was a little weird. And then anyways, Sakura says, let's get along until we die, and he agrees. And then we get another compilation of, you know, them doing date-like things. They go to a photo booth. They go play or sing karaoke. I think there's a bowling scene around here. And we just see like little, just like a picture for each of them, just to show time passes. They do all kinds of fun stuff. And then the saddest thing, she goes back to she gets admitted to the hospital suddenly. So they just say like, she just says, oh, some numbers were a bit off and my parents freaked out, right? But he says something hiding in the shadows of her bright smile was steadfastly eating away at her. And I think that's a pretty powerful line to describe, like, this is about halfway through the movie, how she's starting to, like, degrade. Even though she's not acting like it, she's still happy and smiley and having a jolly good time with him. She is definitely degrading and starting to die. Now, she goes to the hospital, and he goes to the hospital to visit her. And as he walks in, she's doing this little dance and humming and singing. She does that a lot, which I think is pretty cute and shows that little young innocent side of her. But she's humming and singing and doing a little dance, and she just swings her head around towards the door in part of her dance and sees him standing there and just goes, ah! You know, she just screams for, I think, a good solid 3-4 seconds, which I thought was pretty funny. Oh, and I should mention before, this is right after the compilation and after the fight, which is kind of sad. I wish we had seen a little bit more instead of just a compilation before this, because we really don't see them go on dates and stuff like they did before at all after she gets admitted. So they fight, and then it seems like right away after that she's admitted, because all we get is a compilation of some little fun date pictures. Anyways, so she's dancing, and eventually they're talking and stuff. She's settled down, and she says she's pissed off because she's not going to be able to make it to the festival that weekend to see the fireworks and stuff, because she's going to be in for 2 weeks. I don't know if she knows 2 weeks at the time, but she's not going to make it out by the weekend, which she's pretty pissed about. And, you know, Haruki just says, whatever, you can just go to the one, I think 2 weeks later, or I think it just says later, because there's one happening in the town over. And she's like, hell no. But we hear about that later. Anyways, she asks him to play a game of Truth or Dare, just a one-round game. And we find out later what her question was going to be was she wanted to ask why he never says her name, which I'll talk about later because we don't hear about it till later in a different scene. But she wanted to ask a question, lands on Haruki, of course, because he's got the best luck at this game. And he asks, what does living mean to you? So she goes off on this big paragraph about how living basically is about your relationship with others. So she talks about how, you know, you can't really know you're alive unless you interact with others. You can't know that your body's real unless people hold you and hug you. You can't know that your mind's real unless you talk and have conversation with others. So bit of an interesting theme. I think that's cool too because Haruki before really just didn't interact with others, so he probably didn't seem alive before he met her, you know? Whereas she was very alive before and after, just interacting and talking with people all the time. She's always been, she says she was a problem child, but she's always been interacting with people like that, it seems. But yeah, she does this big talk, and then he says, or he doesn't say anything, and she pauses and says, "What's wrong?" And he says, "You're always teaching me all manner of things, you know." And she's like, "That's rather sudden. You're embarrassing me." And he says, "I mean it. Thank you." You know, he's pretty to the point compared to her. He just says, "You're teaching me all kinds of stuff," because he didn't know that. He didn't care about interacting with people before, but he's starting to realize the benefit of it and how alive he probably feels getting to know her, you know. And then she just kind of runs up to him and hugs him from the front this time. And you can see in his face, he's kind of like, "Oh no, not again, don't do this again." And then she says, like, before he asks, she says, "This isn't like that other time, this isn't a joke." And he says, "Then what?" And she says, basically she describes how she's been wanting to feel other people's warmth, which probably is like a thing about, I think it just makes her feel alive. Like she talked about how hugging people makes you feel like your body's real. So maybe she's been feeling disconnected or something, and she's just been wanting hugs and to feel other people. So she talks about how she wants to feel his warmth. He lets her, you know, they hug. And then he says, after she describes it or whatever, he says, "Hey, aren't you acting a little weird?" And she just says, "Nope, not at all. I just want a taste of your reality and normalcy." And they're fine with that. And then, bum bum bum, Kyoko bursts in as they're hugging, and she is not having it. She walks over pointing at Haruki like she's about to raise hell. And Sakura is like, "Hell no, I ain't letting you stop this man's," or whatever. She jumps and takes the bullet, and she just hugs her and like traps her. And she's like, "Ah, don't hug me, 1 sec, I gotta talk to him." And Sakura's like, "No, I need your warmth." And he kind of like, he doesn't really sneak out, but he walks by and she distracts him and waves at him on the way out and everything. So that Kyoko can't argue with them. But yeah, he sneaks out basically, or escapes, I should say. And then we see after that Sakura's mother in there that night. It seems like it's quite a bit later, but that night she's like folding clothes for her and stuff, and she's asking like, "Oh, Kyoko came in today, didn't she?" and all that. And basically Sakura is writing in her notepad, or Living with Dying it's called. I don't think I mentioned that earlier. She has this book though that she's writing her bucket list and everything in, and like a diary kind of. It's a bit of a combination of everything. Called Living with Dying, which is, you know, how she met Haruki at the start. Just he picked it up because she lost it, whatever. But yeah, she's scribbling and living with dying, and she says, "Hey, Mom, can I ask you a favor? It's about after I die." And her mom demonstrates what we talked about earlier, that like avoidance that she does, and she says, "Sakura, don't talk like that," you know, because she just avoids thinking about it, which of course at the same time it's sad and Sakura doesn't like it, but you can kind of understand it. Like no one wants to see their kid die, and let alone like they have to watch her slowly decay over the years now that she's got a timer on her life, you know. They probably don't want to think about it at all. I get why they're trying to not act like she's dying, but at the same time, you know, it's a good example of showing that, and Sakura's not a fan. So, but we see later that we don't see it in this scene, but later she mentions how she asks her mom to like give her book to, she doesn't say the name because you know, Haruki didn't want his name floating around the air, but she says he probably won't be at the funeral. He's too scared, or he'll be too scared to go to it, but at some point he'll come and he'll look for this book, so someone will know the name of Living with Dying, and he'll know that I was sick before because I told him, and he's gonna come someday, probably after the funeral, to get it. And she asks, "Please give it to him, you know, please let him read it, because it's gonna be his after." And she's like, "Okay," you know. Well, we don't actually see it, but she's accepts it at some point. Anyways, the next scene we see, he gets pretty scared, finds out she's staying in the hospital 2 weeks longer and everything. And then when he goes to visit her, he says like he was beside himself with worry, right? He is not not doing too hot. He was panting and stuff. He looks like he ran to the hospital. He might have just been like very anxious and stuff. Might have been having a panic attack, but it looks like he probably ran there. He probably thought the worst was happening, but she's like, nope. She smiles at him, and they sneak out of the hospital somehow. I don't know how you do that. I've been hospitalized before when I was like 9, and there is people everywhere, and you are not going to be able to get out in a hospital gown. But somehow she had her clothes with her and stuff. She was able to wear normal clothes the whole time, and she was able to just get out. So I don't really know how that works, but but she sneaks out with them to go look at a nighttime view. Which we don't hear about it later, but we don't hear about it yet, but there's more significance to why they got out there. But when they get there, she's just looking at the view, and he's like, you gotta wait until you're discharged to do this, right? But they get there, and he's talking, or watching her watch the view, and he just says, hey, you're not going to die, right? And this kind of feels a lot like, I felt this one seemed so much like the beach scene in the original, like, or the starting within like the first half hour. It just feels a lot like the beach scene where he says, are you really dying? Because he's starting to, like, the more he knows her, he seems to just not believe that she's dying, that this is happening, which is interesting because that's probably how it felt for the rest of her family and stuff, and this is him becoming more human. But this time he also has a different meaning to it. He's saying, you're not going to die, right? And she's like, yeah, I am. We're all going to die. And he's like, no, that's not what I mean. And she says, oh, for my pancreas? Well, yeah. And he says, no, that's not what I mean. And, he's asking, like, you're not going to die soon. He was probably worried that she was going to die within that week or something, right? That's probably why he was so worried about her sneaking out and getting out of the hospital, too. And she says she's fine. We learn later that her lifespan got cut in half, which doesn't end up mattering, sadly. But one thing that's pretty sad about this is as the fireworks go off, because that's why she snuck out, was just to see the fireworks on that last festival night. He says he cares about her. He was worried about her, and she says she's so lucky to have someone care about her like that. And then the fireworks go off. She says, I'll make sure to let you know before I die. And then I think shortly after that, the fireworks go off, and Haruki kind of realizes, oh, it's the festival night. That's why she wanted to get out tonight. And as they watch the fireworks, she kind of like says, hey, you're glad you came, huh? And he says, you know what? Yeah, I am. And she's like, you can be better than that. Give me a hug. Bring it in there, bro. No, but they hug, and this part was really like, the second time watching it, this scene was just so hard to watch, because this is the last time that we see, like, it doesn't happen until weeks later, so there's likely a lot more hugs and holding and saying hi. But this is the last time on screen that we see them in the same frame at all, like, until she dies. So, for us at least as a viewer, this is the last hug that they get. This is the last night they get to spend together, and that was just a really hard scene to watch the second time, I found. The first time it's a gorgeous scene, they're hugging, the fireworks are going off, and they're just all smiles, and it's so awesome to watch. But, the second scene, when you know what's about to happen, it's like, damn. Fuck, that's a hard scene to watch. It's so sad. But I do love that scene. It's pretty beautiful. And she promises at one point, she says, I'm sorry for making you worry. We'll go to the beach together, which is an important note for later that I want to mention. But she promises to go to the beach, and he's like, that's a pretty, what's the word he says? He says it's kind of a funny promise, because it's like, I promise I'll go to the beach with you. And he's like, bruh. Anyways, so then he goes to narration, and he says, the promise to visit the ocean. I worried that this might be some kind of foreshadowing, but my fears were unfounded. The day that she was discharged came in no time at all. Now that line is also a pretty hard one to hear, because when they say the day she was discharged came in no time, it's like, yay, she's finally out. But with the second time you watch it again, she dies on the day she's discharged. So it's just hard to hear that, damn, it was foreshadowing. She did die the day she got out, Now, the next scenes we see are all on the day of the incident, the day that she dies. But we did this cute little scene before that I really like. So in the morning, you know, he wakes up, he's texting his e-girl, texting his girlfriend, or not his girlfriend, but his friend. Not even, he doesn't call her a friend. I don't know what they are. We'll talk about that later though. He's texting Sakura and he's like, she tells him she's getting out after lunch, I think. She says this new afternoon or something, getting out at noon. And they plan to meet up for lunch, right? Just a little text combo, goes by fast. And then you hear Haruki's mom go, "So you got a girlfriend, eh?" or something. Or no, not really. But she basically thinks like he got a girlfriend or he has a crush now or something. He's like, "No, Mom, it's not like that." Like we all did when we were 12, you know. It's how it goes. And she says, "Well, it doesn't really matter. I'm happy that you found someone who can see you for who you are," because she assumes it's a friend or something. And Haruki's like, "Wait, what?" And she just says, "Did you really think I couldn't tell you were lying? Don't take your mother lightly." And she kind of like grins at him, because she knows he likes a girl. It's pretty obvious to her, you know, mother's intuition. And Haruki smiles, you know, and then the next thing we see is, love this guy, my man, Gumboy. Oh yeah. So he's just walking off to lunch, you know, he's heading out early. And well, you know it, on the side of the road, Gumboy's just chilling on a bench at a little like vending machine area or something. I don't really know what it is, maybe a corner store. But Gumboy's like, "Hey, what's up?" You know, asks him where he's headed, and he says, "Oh, I'm going to meet someone." And Gumboy goes, "Sakura, right?" Classic, you know, like he knows this guy at this point. Every time he talks to him, it's about Sakura. But he guesses he's going to meet Sakura, and he says, "Yep." And you know, he keeps walking on. And he offers him some gum on the way by, and he says, no, I'm good. And then we see Gumboy's two little brothers, I believe. It doesn't specifically say them, but, you know, they call him bro. I imagine they're both just his little brothers. He's taking care of them. But his little brothers come out, and they shoot the shit out of him with a water gun, right? They kill his ass. He gets owned because they wanted popsicles, so naturally they killed their source. But he says he'll get him some or whatever. And the interesting thing about this is we see this whole scene with him play out. We see Haruki watching this, and there's no way in hell Haruki would have stayed for this before. He would have been like, "Okay, that conversation's over. I'm out of here," and kept walking. But no, he stayed and he watched, and he kind of watched it. Like he thought, you know what? I'm taking interest in others. He watches this and he sees it go down, and he's like, "Damn, people are interesting," you know. I think that's a pretty cool scene for him, because it also shows that character progression that I always mention, of him starting to become more like Sakura, or at least him starting to become interested in people, you know? And this is one of the last times we see that before the big thing happens. He talks about it a bit after, but he watches this and then he says, "Gum," and he goes, "What?" And he says, "You know what, I will have some gum after all." And he tosses him the gum and he walks off and he says, you know, have a good time with her or whatever. You both have a good time. And then one thing I thought was kind of interesting is he didn't eat the gum. He just kind of pocketed it. And we see it actually next to a cup 6 hours later in the cafe. Because I'm pretty sure he was going to tell Sakura, he's going to say, "Hey, I got this gum from Gumboy. I socialized. I asked him for it. I talked to him." And he was probably going to show off with her, which I think would have been a really cute scene. But, you know, life wouldn't work out like that. So, you know, he gets the gum and he starts walking towards the cafe, and he has this bit of a inner monologue where he talks about how he's changed, or how Sakura would have said he chose to change. I think he says she changed me, or she would say I chose to change. And talks about how he's becoming more social, and he's kind of looking around. He's watching different couples walk by as he walks down the street. Which is a very cool way of showing his progression, because he doesn't have his nose buried in a book as he's walking or anything. He's starting to notice things. He's starting to notice people, I should say. Now, this part was pretty cute before the bad part. But he gets to the cafe, he sits down, and he starts texting her, right? He's texting her and playing around, like, not, I'd say kind of flirting, but he's like, "Hey, glad to hear you're discharged. Come meet me at Cafe Spring." And she's like, "Oh, you remembered that place. That's crazy." And he says, "I was just thinking about you." He's becoming a bit of a smooth talker, you know. And she says, "Oh, are you sick? You're acting nicer than usual." And he says, "Nope, unlike you, I'm in perfect health," because he's, smooth Taka. And she's pissed off. She's like, "Bro, that's mean." No, she's not pissed, but she's like, "Ha, meanie. Now you have to give me 3 compliments," because she seems to like getting 3 compliments. Or no, not 3 compliments. She just says, "You have to compliment me now." And you see this scene where he thinks like how amazing she is. He says, "You're a truly amazing person, the complete opposite of me. I probably wanted to become like you, able to acknowledge others and acknowledged by others." He just talks about that for a bit. And we see this like 20-second clip of just all kinds of different stuff going on as he watches the outside world for the first time, because he's kind of changing. And it feels like a much more vibrant scene than a lot of the older ones, because it seems to just get more colorful. His world gets more bright as it goes along. And then at the end he says, "I want to take a leaf out of your book." He starts typing. And before he like backspaces it, and then he types, "I want to eat your pancreas," and he sends it. And then sadly that's the last text he ever sends to her. So we get a bit of a sequence where, daytime becomes sunset. And we saw on his phone it was, I think, 12:03 when he sends that text. And then it's like 6:30 or something, 6 o'clock, 6:05, when the owner finally kicks him out. I think it was like 6:05 because the owner probably gave him a few minutes extra just to like, maybe he's meeting someone, maybe whatever, just some pity time, before he finally gets kicked out and he walks home in the dark, And this is a sad walk because it kind of leaves you to think, what's going on? Why didn't she show up? That's unlike her, She never would have done that before. And then we see later on the news as he gets home, he's just sitting at the table refreshing his phone, hoping for an answer, which is really sad. And then on the news we hear that Sakura was the victim. We hear that she was stabbed and found around noon, so just after that text was sent, or maybe even before. She was found stabbed in the road, and that she was like driven to the hospital and died shortly after. Which was a really hard scene to watch, especially seeing his expression, because he just seems so much more sad, and like he didn't care before. It would have been just another name on the screen, even if it was someone from his school. But he's just shocked. He gets up, he tosses the chair behind him as he stands, and he's like breathing heavily and slams his hand down on the desk and everything, as he hears that she died, before he like slowly walks up to his room and trips on the stairs, and he just sits there on the stairs as he falls over. He lays there and just shakes. We can't tell if he's crying. I don't think he had tears, but he was breathing heavy and shaking, and he was not happy. Because, he's made his first friend, I think you'd say. He never calls her a friend or a girlfriend or anything, but his first important person to him has just died, like, within probably a month of meeting her. We don't know how long this took, but she died just like that, and that's kind of how death works. For some people it's more when it's going to happen, or roughly you get a bit of a time frame because they're sick, which is what we thought was going to happen. And that's why it's so much more sudden that she just, within minutes, is killed. She just gets stabbed, bleeds out, and dies immediately. And that's I think really well done as far as the show goes, because we start with the funeral and we think she's going to die of being sick, but she gets taken away early by this stabbing victim, or stabbing guy, criminal, whatever you want to call him. And that's really that's a great way of showing how death works, I think, because it's sudden for a lot of people. Most of us don't know when we're gonna die, and it's hard to show that in a movie. Especially when you see the funeral at the start, it's kind of predictable that someone's gonna die at some point. But with them building up this expectation that it's gonna be because she was sick, and then before she just gets out of the hospital, and we're like, awesome, we get more time to see them, bond and date and stuff. She just gets out of the hospital and she gets cut down right in the middle of the road. And that's really how death feels for everyone, I think, is their time was cut short. If you've ever lost someone, you know how it feels like. No matter how old they are, pretty much, it feels like their time was cut short, or that time was stolen from them. And that really shows that well, especially for an anime. Like, it's hard to love a character in a show if it's not well done. But that was a really, like, that was a death that I really felt. That was probably part of the reason I wanted to do this podcast at all, was I watched that movie, I saw that scene, and I thought, damn, I want to do something where I can talk about this. Because part of the reason I made this podcast is because I don't have too many friends that like anime, that I talk to a lot, like, and I figure there's a lot of people out there that are closet fans of anime or something, that may want to discuss shows, but they can't, they don't have friends that watch it, stuff like that, and I figured this might be a good way to do that. So, if you're out there and you don't have too many friends that watch anime and stuff, hit me up on the comments or anything. I'm willing to make a Discord server maybe at some point, but I'd love to hear from you guys. But yeah, this was a deep scene for me. This made me think a lot for quite a few days, honestly. And I don't do that much with movies. I don't feel movies very often, which is why this one was crazy, like, impactful. So we see her die. Well, we don't see her die, but we hear about this happening, and it leads you to think, like, how would he have felt knowing that she died 6 hours before he found out? At least 6 hours, probably, because she died when he texted at 12 o'clock, and you see him leave the restaurant, or the cafe, at 6. And he doesn't hear about it till he gets there, which means I think it's probably hard to hear about someone dying, but thinking about how long it's been since they died, that you've gone on with life without knowing that they've died, is a hard thing as well. So, just thinking about how those 6 hours must have felt for him, must have been crazy. As well as, like, finding out on the news, that's gotta fucking suck. Like, most people when they die, most of us find out from a relative or a friend saying, hey, come over, sit down, we gotta talk, or they call you and tell you or something. This guy just walks in and his parents like, oh, you gotta be careful, people are getting killed out here. Oh, who got killed? Oh, this girl. And it's his only friend, his girl that he probably loves, which we're gonna discuss later. But finding out on the news, seeing that gray mugshot looking image with the name, like the words Sakura Yamauchi 17 deceased beside it, would be like, that's like reading a fucking portfolio on a person. And just he knows so much about her now. He's listened to her stories, he's bonded with her, and she's basically been reduced to a mugshot with a name or number. Even it's barely even a name at that point. It's just her full name, age, and the fact that she's dead. And that's gotta be fucking terrible. I can't imagine finding out like that. But that was really just a hard scene. And then it also, as I was saying, like, it's so sudden, it makes us think she was going to get out of the hospital that day. She was probably so excited to live the rest of her life. She was probably thinking, awesome. Like, the last thing she says was, I can't wait to make the most of my remaining time. Yay. Like, and then she didn't get any. And that's an important thing for us all to know. Like, as she says earlier, you never know if you'll drop dead tomorrow. That's true for me and just as much for you. And that's crazy. That really made me think, like, about my own mortality even, which is crazy to think of with an anime making you think like that. But this one it's a good movie. As I said, you should watch it if you haven't. Some people probably won't like it as much as others. My sister didn't care for it, even though I recommended it, which I can't imagine not liking it as much as I did, because it was such a good movie. But, like, it really makes you think. Like, her life was cut short like that. I know I'm rambling on a bit, but her bucket list is one thing that it kind of hit me a few minutes after. I was thinking, oh, she was going to probably have so much more fun times with them. And then I thought, they just mentioned before she goes in the hospital that they've got about half of the bucket list items completed when she gets admitted. And chances are they didn't get many done when she was in there. A lot of it was probably going places. They got the festival done, but, like, she was probably so happy to be out there with half a bucket list left complete, and then she died before she could even touch it. She couldn't even get to lunch with them. And another sad thing is, like, the last thing they did was text, and that's gotta be hard too. Like, it's just hard. And one thing that he talks about, this one they actually do get into, is that he doesn't even know if she read his last text, which we find out later that she did, which is absolutely amazing. Like that's awesome that she heard it or read it, I guess, and probably felt that text before she was killed. But it's still crazy sad to think about. But I don't want to talk about that too much more. I think I probably went on for about probably a bit too long. I'm looking at the time now. This is getting long already. But yeah, and one of the crazy things is she dies so early on in the movie. We see the funeral at the start. We get a lot of fun stuff in the middle. Like I really like the middle part of this or the start and middle of this movie where we have like the hotel and everything. And then she dies like pretty early on in the movie. I think there's still like 45 minutes left in the movie when she dies. And then we get so much closure with this death, which I think is really good. I think this movie could have made a TV show easily. They could have spent more time on the dates and everything. But I think giving us not that much time to see her being alive really shows how, like, life is fleeting, you know? I'll probably talk about pacing later a bit more, but having her die early on and then getting a lot of time to have that closure in the show, I think is also a really good choice because we needed that. If they had just killed her off there and ended the movie, I would have been so pissed. I would have been upset as hell. But we don't. We hear more. And this is after she's dead. We see the funeral. So it's the same scene from the start. We see Kyoko crying again. All this sad stuff. And then, you know, Haruki's not there. And then it cuts to Haruki in his bedroom, and he's just reading. There's stacks of books everywhere. And we are led to believe that he probably just sat there and read books for 10 days. Because this is 10 days after he doesn't do anything. He just sits in his room and he reads. And I imagine he was reading just to not think about her. He probably blocked it out of his memory for a long time. And then he says, and before that, we also see The Little Prince is off his shelf now and in his backpack. This might mean he was ready to read it. We saw him take it off the shelf before he goes out for for lunch, I think. Or we saw it on the shelf before lunch. But she died before he even got to read it, I'm pretty sure. So maybe he read it right away after just to think about her. Maybe he hasn't read it yet. Maybe he was holding on to it. But we don't even know if he ever reads it in this story. But we do see it's off his shelf now. And then he says, or he narrates, having sorted out my feelings, something became clear to me. I steeled my resolve, ready to face the conclusion of the story. And then he goes to Sakura's house to see her mother. And on the way there, I think it's kind of nice. His mother, Haruki's mother, gives him a funeral offering to give to Sakura, which I think is good because it means he did tell his mother, or he might not have told his mother, but you know she saw how he reacted to the news. She knows what's going on, and I think that's good that his mother was there for him, or as well as best she could be. I think, though we don't see much of their interactions after. So, anyways, he goes to her house, and he pays her his respects to the shrine, I think it's called. I've actually heard it called a Butsudan, I think. I don't remember what the word is, sorry. I'm not familiar with the culture all that much. I'd like to be, but I'm from Canada, so, you know, we don't have too much of that down here that I've seen, at least. But I am very curious about it. I looked into a bit of the funeral practices actually, which is it's very interesting, a lot of the stuff that they do. But I won't get into that too much in this podcast. But one thing I wanted to mention is on her little shrine, we see the Little Prince up against her, like the book, up against her picture in the frame. Now, we're not told if this was there before he got there. It very well could have been maybe his mother put it, or her mother put it there or something. But I think Haruki probably brought it to the grave and put it there for her, to give it back, because he said he'd give it back after a year, and that was the promise that he broke. He goes on about how he broke his promise of returning the book, and she broke her promise of telling her when he would die, when she would die. Sorry. So I think that was his book, or her book, that he returned, but we don't really know. I don't think he reads the book after, so there's no way of really telling unless he does. If he does and you know that, you know, let me know in the comments. I'm very curious about stuff like that. But I'm pretty sure that was his copy or her copy that he was returning. So he pays her his respects, and then he turns to her mother, who's there with him, and he says, "I have to ask, did she have a book called Living with Dying? I knew about her illness, all this." And she says, "So it was you. I'm so glad. I'm so glad you came. I'm so, so glad that I kept my hopes up." Because remember, this is 10 days after the funeral. I looked up the funeral practices, as I said, and apparently they try to get everything done as fast as they can. They try to bury them and everything. I think, or most of them are cremated, apparently, though Sakura said she didn't want to be cremated. But most people are buried or cremated and everything like that within, I think, they said as fast as they could, so within days probably. And this is 10 days after, so she was probably giving up hope because, or she hasn't, she said, but she was probably starting to, seeing as 10 days after, there's no sign of him. But she kept up hope. She says she's glad she did, and that he's the one, and she's so relieved, And then we see they're sitting at the dinner table, and she slides the book across, and he says, like, can I read it? And she goes, I mean, yeah, she left it for you, right? Like, she says she wanted me to give this diary to a certain person after she died, and she talks about how in the hospital she said, like, the criteria, the guy has to know the name, know that she was sick before and all that. And she says, like, she said he'd probably be too afraid to come to the funeral, but she said he'd come to get this no matter what. And then she thanks him again, So we see him, like, look through the story, and we get a big part where she kind of recalls the story up to this point. So he, like, there's one part where we see a scribbled out word, which I'm pretty sure was his name. I don't read Japanese or speak Japanese or anything, so I couldn't tell, but I'm pretty sure that was where his name got scribbled out at one point. And then she talks about the summary. She recalls what happened in the story. She talks about how she was curious about him for a while, and like how she noticed him before, which was probably a bit of a call, like a wake up call to Haruki, that like people do notice him, or at least she did, and that's probably really interesting to him. Sorry if you're my stomach, I don't know what's going on with that. But I really like seeing that sequence where he goes over it, and it's also worth noting that she seems as happy as she talks when she writes, because she doesn't know when she's dying and stuff. She doesn't know she's gonna be stabbed to death at this point. She just writes it like a diary, And she says, like, I'll make him understand the glory of offal before I die. Offal is I think cooked organs. Like, they talk about how she really likes cooked organs and it's her favorite food and everything. And like, I think that was I don't know if I mentioned that scene, the scene where they're eating yakiniku. And she's like, you gotta try the pancreas, it's so good. Can I get some more heart and tripe, That was hard to watch too, but that's just because it's fucking gross. But she recaps all this, and we see one part when she's in the hospital. One part she recaps, and she says, or actually before that, I'm going to mention, on the day where they had that little fight and everything, and he got punched the fuck out by Takahiro, she wrote, "Today was a very, very bad and good day. I cried alone just a bit. I've been kind of a crybaby today." Which, it doesn't clear up much about that scene. That's why I was talking about how we really don't hear why she was upset. Like, we can deduce a lot of it, but there's things that we don't get as much, because there's some things that just, they kind of leave it up to speculation, and I think we just have to fill it in ourselves for some of that. Anyways, she keeps talking, and she gets to the part where she's in the hospital, right, where she gets admitted. And she says, no, I won't lie here. I'm pretty scared. I'm putting up a front for the others, not lying to them, just putting up a front. Excuse me, sorry. But, she talks about how he walked in on her when she was dancing, and how she was so embarrassed that tears came out and everything, and also that she was so relieved he came and everything. Sorry. And yeah, she just is so happy that he came to check on her, because before this movie, there's no way he would have checked on someone that's just a classmate in the hospital. Like, she probably had lots of people that would have, like Kyoko and her friends. But Haruki is just, he doesn't care about people. He would never have done that. He probably would have for his family, but even then, like, nobody else that he would care about enough to go into the hospital for. But she's just so happy that he did. And, now he's becoming more open. And this is where we hear about her lifespan being cut in half and everything. Which I find is interesting because the way they mention it is she says, my lifespan got cut in half. And then they flip to the next page and she says, I was so happy is the next word. And this is, technically it's a different part. She's talking about the fireworks. And how he, like she says, I had no idea he cared for me this much. I was so happy. But like coming from the my lifespan got cut in half to I was so happy is a very kind of meaningful transition of, even though that's terrible news probably for like anyone to hear that your lifespan's cut in half, she doesn't really let it get her down as much, She was probably upset by it for sure. Not saying she wasn't, but she still enjoys life. She still enjoys what she has, And now, yeah, like I was saying, the last page says, I'm getting discharged tomorrow. I'm going to make the most of my remaining time. Yay. And then, yeah, well, it's more expressive than that, but it's hard to read it expressive, knowing what happens. But this just shows how unexpected it was. Like, even for her, for everyone involved, it was just so sudden that she just died like that. And then we get the farewell letter. So, he says, thanks for letting me read it. He gives it back to the mom. And then the mother is like, there's more. And he's like, huh? And then he flips through and sees at the back of the book there's, like, little letters to everyone. And now this is one of my other favorite scenes. This one, I didn't care for this scene all that much. Like, the first time I watched it, it didn't mean too much. But as I read The Little Prince and I analyzed different parts, this was just a huge scene. It was so much bigger than I thought before. So I might compare to The Little Prince a little bit throughout the scene. Again, I'm not saying you have to read it. It's still perfectly fine. I'll summarize it at the end. But I'm going to mention it a little bit throughout this part. I'll talk about it a lot more at the end. I'm going to talk about all the comparisons. But there's just some little visual things I want to mention. But he reads the farewell letter. And as he reads the first line, which says, finally to you, you see, like, Sakura is, like, a ghostly entity behind him, kind of. And just, like, she puts his hand on his shoulder, and he's, like, transported to a different galaxy. Now, of course, this is probably all going on in his head. I imagine this is just him reading and kind of connecting to her, which is interesting because I want to say, like, he loves books, right? He's been reading all his life. That's all he does. And he likes books probably more than he likes talking to people, which makes me think this was probably a great experience for him to be able to, like, to read her feelings, He doesn't talk much, and he doesn't understand people very much, but, like, in a written form like this, in a farewell letter, he was probably reading her like a book and understanding her so much better, And that might also be part of why he was, like, transported into her universe, into a different setting, is because he was starting to, like, he reads a lot, so he probably has a great imagination for that, so he was probably, like, drawn in, I'm sure that makes sense, but he was drawn in because he's reading it, and he becomes, like, he embraces that and feels like he's inside of that moment with her, which is really what it is. It's a moment with her that he reads, and I love this scene a lot, so I'm going to talk about it quite a bit, probably. But where he's transported, he's, like, we see Sakura fly up to this colorful little planet. The planet's, like, about the size of her, and this is already the first direct reference to The Little Prince. Because I'm going to read a little line out of it. It says, once upon a time, there was a little prince who lived on a planet hardly any bigger than he was, and who needed a friend. And this planet, it's asteroid B612, is, like, you see it in, like, there's pictures in the book, and it's a tiny little planet. It's about the size of the one we see in the movie, but they they reference a lot of these things directly in this scene, which is interesting, because, it's her favorite book, and it might mean that he read the book and now he's translating it like this, but I think this is just how she thought of it, kind of like from her perspective. Because we see her talk a lot more here. I think this is her perspective, because it's a letter from her and everything on life, which is why it's in the format of, like, or in the setting of The Little Prince, is because that's her favorite story, And it's also worth noting too that when he's first transported there to that new dimension, you see this one little like there's little shards of like glass looking planet thingies. There's one little green shard is the first one we see, and I looked at it a lot. I looked at the two scenes, and it looks so much like the sea glass she held in that one beach scene, and I think it might have been a little reference to that, which is kind of interesting. It might not have been, might have been me just looking too far into it, but when I saw that, I was like, this looks just like the sea glass, so I thought I should mention it. But yeah, she says, "Don't worry, I won't write your name. You're the one who asked me not to. So how's it going?" And she gets into it, talks about it, and she says at one point that she's wrote a lot of notes for everyone, right? Like the farewell letter is just a bunch of messages to everyone that she's leaving behind. And he says, like this book belongs to you. I'll let you decide whether or not to pass them along. Now, I think this is partially because she's like, he's gonna be up to date with my life when I die. At that moment, he'll know if he should give her letter to Takahiro, for example. Probably not, because they had a falling out and everything. And like he's in charge of giving it to the people that should have the letters and that shouldn't. So for that reason, I think is part of it. But the biggest thing for me here, I think, is she makes him pass along the messages to kind of trick him into or make him feel responsible for talking to people that he doesn't talk to, like Kyoko, probably her friends, maybe some extended family, I don't know. But she makes him deliver the messages to kind of keep getting him out there. Because at the start of the movie, like we see, he doesn't get out there and talk to people, but she's encouraging him. Like she's trying to get him to talk to more people than just her. And this is a good way of like, after she's gone, she's still looking out for him, and still trying to get him to like just interact with people and just move on without her, because she was getting him to be so social, and then she died, and then this kind of passes the torch on, if that makes sense. Now, she's standing on the bright planet with all the colors and everything. And Haruki is standing on this dark gray, like, moon-looking planet, which might just be, I think, just to show that they're so different. How she was had such a colorful, bright personality, and he was so gray and dull and cold when they first met and stuff. It could be something else, but that's just what I thought. That's what I took from it. And then he says, "I just had to know. I had to read the epilogue to your story, And during the scene, I want to mention there's a song playing that I absolutely love. I've listened to the whole OST like probably a good 4 or 5, no, more than that even. I listened to it a lot just while I was writing notes and stuff because I love the soundtrack a lot. But this is my favorite song. It's like a 7-minute song, but it's so good, and it feels so like I was saying at the start, so celestial and so like I think there's a harp playing, there's a piano. It just feels very otherworldly, kind of, if that makes sense. So she talks for a bit, and we see her discover this flower. Now this is another reference to the Little Prince, and I don't know why I said flower. It's more of like a tree-looking plant. It's like a little alien bulb tree. It's got little bubbles on it, kind of. And she takes care of it like they do in The Little Prince, where she puts a screen up to protect it from the wind. She puts a glass thing around it to keep it warm and stuff at night. She waters it, all that. And she takes care of it, which is very, very interesting to see after that scene. Like, the first time I watched it, I was like, okay, what's up with the flower? I don't know, whatever. And then after I read The Little Prince, the flower is so much more significant because the Little Prince sees this one flower grow on his planet, and he takes care of it. And eventually the flower, it talks, by the way, picks on him, so he leaves because he's upset. After taking care of the flower, he leaves, and then he thinks about the flower the whole time he's gone. Which makes me think that maybe the flower is their relationship, or maybe the flower is Haruki, and maybe she's thinking about him now that she's gone or something, or it's there's a lot of things that I haven't really figured out all the way, but I've been thinking about. And what I'm thinking now is the flower is Sakura, and that she, this is before she leaves and everything. But she is the flower. She's growing the flower. It's her her personality and everything. It's her life, maybe. But she's sitting there planting it and not planting it, but taking care of it and watering it and everything for a bit before she floats off the surface, and we got a little musical tune as she floats off the surface and falls down to Earth, where she or before she does that, she actually jumps from planet to planet and then she gets to Earth, which is kind of interesting because actually I think that happens first, right? But she bounces from planet to planet, and each planet has a little item on it that reminds me of one item from the story of the Little Prince, because in the Little Prince, the main character, the prince himself, bounces from planet to planet and meets a different character on each planet and talks with them for a bit. Now each of these planets has one symbol, or at least 4 of the 6 of them has one thing to represent the character, like the hat for the prideful man, or the very vain man, or whatever. The throne for the king, the desk for the geographer, and then the lamplighter's lamp and everything like that. So it'll make sense more when I discuss it later, I think. Or if you've read the book, it'll make sense. Just little things like that. But as this happens, she talks about how she thought, she says one line here, I'm going to read it out directly, actually. She says, some people, well, this part isn't direct, but she says, some people thought we were getting a bit too close. And then after she says, to be completely honest, there were many times I thought I was in love with you. And I mean, my heart skipped a beat, both in the hotel room and when we hugged. But our relationship can't be described through simple terms like love or friendship, right? And this leads me to believe that maybe they were in love, she says, it's such a simple term, we wouldn't be in love or friends, but that might mean they might be more than in love, whatever, it could be a lot of things. But I think they definitely did have a romantic relationship together. It was, she says, it was more than that. It was, he knew her secret, and he was cherishing her for that and everything, and taking care of her. But I think if she had lived a long time and everything, they probably would have dated or got married or something. I don't know. It's, as she says, it's a complicated relationship. It's more than love or friendship. But I think they probably were in love at the same time. And she probably did have, they both had feelings for each other, I think. That again, I'm just deducing what I saw from this. And then, she says later on as well, I want to say, she mentions what her question was in the hotel, in the hospital room, how she would have asked, why you wouldn't say my name. And she says, were you afraid to make me a person in your mind? Were you afraid that I'd imagine too? And then she says, is that why you were afraid to make me your friend or your girlfriend? Which, again, the way she talks about that sounds like she loved him, but she was kind of holding back, She didn't want to make him get attached just to die, I think that makes sense. I might be explaining it all badly, but, no, my stomach won't shut up, sorry. But she talks about, how he was scared to make her someone, and says, if I'm right, leave an offering or something by my grave. So just a casual little thing. She's pretty funny and, silly, just like she was in Being Alive, when the way she writes, which might also just be because this is how Haruki read it, because it's more like a conversation than it is like a monologue, because he takes part in some of it. He speaks up a few times, which is kind of interesting because it sounds like a conversation much more than it's written, which might just be because he's reading it, I think, and because his imagination is making it feel like he's there, because he's reading it and he's a book guy, so this is his way of finally connecting to her on another level, if that makes sense. And later on he says, she says, so I got stubborn and I avoided using your name in turn. Did you notice? Which I think is interesting because they both, didn't say each other's names all movie, yet I still knew Sakura's name well because they hinted at it a few times, or Kyoko said it a bunch. Even though they don't say it to each other very much, we still hear the names a lot. And then Haruki's name, we don't notice till even after this point in the movie. We don't hear it out, till... actually, no, I think we did hear it now. We heard it in the journal part, or something like that. Or we're about to hear it or something. But we don't hear his name, all movie. And it's hard to notice, even that we're missing it. Whereas we don't even notice till this point, too, that he doesn't say Sakura's name at all. And it's just kind of an interesting little thing they put in there. And she says, I'm not making fun of you for not saying it. That's not why I started not saying yours. And she says, you see, I looked up to you. You're a really amazing person. And he just goes, no, that's not true. I'm a coward. And And I'd like to talk about the way he says that too, because he says it in such a, like a, no, that's just not true. I'm just like, what does he say? Like you say, I'm just a coward. And he says it though with a smile and his eyes closed, and it seems like he's just savoring the moment, which I think that's a deep moment for him, because this is the last time he really talks to her, and he's talking to her on a different level since it's reading it. But like, he hasn't seen her for 10 days after hanging out with her every day for a long time. And he finally gets to connect with her one last time before, she's, I don't want to say gone forever, because this is like the last part of her, but she lives on within him. But like, this is one of the last conversations he gets to have with her, I'd say, if it counts as a conversation. It probably does for him though, because it's such a big thing to be able to read her feelings. So I think he's just like savoring this last piece of her that he can hold on to as he reads it with his smile and his eyes closed. And I really like the way he's portrayed there. They keep talking. She talks about how she's only herself when she's around others. She's only really a person when she's around others, and she seems like she said, the way she feels about living is it's about your relationships. And then she says she actually admires about him one thing she admires about him is that he can like find his own allure on his own, she says, or like by himself. So she thinks to be alive you have to have relationships with others, but at the same time she's like admiring how content he is with himself and with only himself and his books and stuff, which is very interesting because it kind of shows that it wasn't a one-way street. He wasn't just like, dang, this girl's awesome, she's everything I want to be and stuff, because he does look up to her, he does try to be like her this whole movie, but like at the same time it's a two-way street, like, it's just, I thought it was very interesting to see at the end that it goes both ways and that she was trying to take something from him too. And now she's laying in a rose, like, I don't know what you call it, not a rose bush, but like a rose, I guess they're not technically roses in this story, some kind of flower field, like a prairie, I guess is the word. She's laying down this prairie in this vision that he's having, which is interesting because we see in The Little Prince, again, another little comparison, sorry, that he leaves his rose, gets to Earth eventually, and he finds a whole field of roses and says she would not be happy if she saw how many people there are like her, talking about the rose and stuff. And then eventually discovers that like his rose is only his rose, there's nothing else like it, because of the time he invested in it, right? Because it's the one he planted and or the one he watered and took care of. That's why it's his rose, and none of these other ones can compare. So Sakura's in this field full of flowers, and she's like laying in them, and then eventually she flies up, like floats up into the air, and then returns to her one plant, which is kind of interesting because it's her coming back to her flower after seeing all these flowers on this one endless field. She floats back up to the one flower that she really cares about. And now she says, as she's like floating back up, she says, perhaps I've spent, she starts to like remember her life and her friendship and everything. And we actually see one scene, this is pretty interesting, as she's remembering the story, we see a lot of scenes that we've seen earlier. And then we see one scene where she's on the beach, she's wearing a swimsuit, and Haruki's in the background under like an umbrella and stuff, all wrapped up. He wouldn't be swimming, I don't think. He doesn't look like the kind of person to do that. But we see for just a fraction of a second in this rapid fire of scenes, as it gets faster and faster, the last one we see is them on a beach. So it builds up and builds up into the time that we've seen, the fireworks, everything like that. And then we see, like, it kind of goes forward. So this is actually the future that didn't happen. So she was probably writing this thinking, this is what's going to happen in the future or something. Or this is just her thinking that this is the future. And she sees them on the beach for half a second to kind of show us this is the future. Before we get this next sequence where she's, like, running after him in, like, the spring. The sakura blossoms are floating around everywhere. And she, like, jumps on his back. And it looks like they're going in for a kiss, honestly. Like, she reaches around and, like, smiles in his face, but they close their eyes and stuff, and it looks like they're about to kiss. Again, pretty sure they're a romantic relationship. Hard to tell at some points, but there's this interesting scene where she does that before it all fades to white and she gasps. And then she appears. She says at that moment, "Perhaps I've spent 17 years waiting to be needed by you, just like a cherry blossom waits for spring," or something. That's a little bit paraphrasing, but she gasps, and you see her appear on that on her old planet, but it's gray now. It's not colorful. And you see her big flowers grown up and everything, and all the petals just at once fall down as she starts to fall. So my theory here is when she gasps, this is her being stabbed or dying or immediately like being killed. But I think this is her being stabbed, so she's not dead yet. This is like just before. But she gasps, and you see she slowly starts falling down from the planet, which seems like she's falling at the same time as the petals, which makes me think it's her life or her relationship with him or something is dying at the same time. But she slowly falls down into her arms, or into Haruki's arms, and he holds her in the bridal carry pose again, which is, I think, a very clever choice to do that repetitive carry, because she probably felt so like cherished and cared for when he held her like that. As we saw in her face when she was getting carried and stuff, she seemed to really enjoy that as she rolled around in the bed all happy after and stuff. But he holds her like that, and this time she's like laying there limp. She's not looking up at him or holding his neck. She looks pretty dead. And then we see Haruki like shatter. He turns into these little stars and hear like a little bling. And he just poofs into stars and he's gone. I think this is Sakura seeing him die, because she's leaving the world and she's losing him. And she probably imagined like that she was being held when she was dying or something, even though she was on her own in the road. She watches him disappear as she dies, and we see from Haruki's perspective her floating in the middle of nowhere, off in the distance in space, clutching her chest like where she was stabbed, floating in the middle of nowhere, and then she poofs like into stars as well. So I think that was Sakura saying like she probably felt like she was so close to him when she died. And then he probably felt like he wasn't even there. He didn't even know what happened until later. So he probably felt so distant when she died off by herself, kind of, you know? So he's like, I think this is them both portraying how they saw her die. So she died in his arms. It felt like it's so close to him. And then he wasn't there for her. So he's probably regretting that and everything as she shatters into stars. Now that part I didn't notice till after watching it like 3 or 4 times. Probably the third watch I think I noticed that. And I started to watch the scene a few times, and it made me really like, I think I almost cried a few times. But just seeing how he held her and stuff before she died was just hard. And then as she poofs and stuff, she talks about how like she says, "You see, I wanted to tell you before I died that I'd like to take a leaf out of your book, but I shouldn't be using an expression like that. It would be a shame to describe the relationship we have using normal, everyday words, you know? Like, kind of like what Haruki was saying earlier. And then it cuts to real life, back to, like, the desk, and Haruki asks his mother, like, where's her phone? And then it starts to blend the two. Like, you hear her talking, you see him scrolling, and you hear her talking, you see the book, you see him scrolling, all this stuff. Blends around, and she says, "So I came up with this. You might not like the idea, but I've decided I want to eat your pancreas." And all the music just swells up and just stops. And then you see this quiet music fade back in a little bit as he sees his email on her phone, and he sees that it was open and read. And damn, that fucking scene, I lost it there a few times, I think. That scene was beautiful, just how as simple as reading the text meant so much to him, because this means, he says it reached her, or he says it did reach her, which would mean so much to you, knowing that your last words got to her. Because with a text, stuff like texts, you don't know if they get it. You don't know if she saw it. And until this, like, over the 10 days, he probably didn't even know if she knew that he cared about her like that, that he was so inspired by her. But then just before she died, she read it, and then she was stabbed and killed. And he starts to, like, he's close to crying and stuff. And he asks her mother if he can cry, which is quite a scene. He says, like, I know you're not the right person to ask about this, but can I cry and stuff? And she nods, and he just bawls. He just sobs down on the table. And it's a hard cry to listen to. I think the voice actor killed it with this one, because he just sounds broken and just ruined, knowing that that it reached her. And I like that they show her mother at one point clutching her chest a little bit, just kind of taking in the relationship that they had, because she's starting to really appreciate the times that Haruki gave to her. Because I don't know if she read the book or not before, but she knows that he was important to her, and hearing him cry like that means that she knows that she was important to him as well. And I think that was a pretty beautiful scene. And then as he cries, he starts to narrate, "I was happy to know that you needed me, that my words had reached you. You often said that we were not aligned, not looking the same way. Well, of course not. We were always looking at each other. I'm the one who lived my life just to meet you. To meet you, I've made choices in life for the sake of nothing else. Thank you." And as we see this, there's some gorgeous backgrounds on a rainy day, all grayed out, not black and white, but very saturated or desaturated, sorry. And then it cuts to a rainy cloud over a big ocean with a mountain and stuff, and it slowly becomes sunnier as the sun peeks out from the clouds and the rain stops. And that really shows the closure he's coming to in this scene, where he he hears her thoughts for the last time, and he starts to accept and realize that she did hear him as well. And I love that scene there. That's one of the other scenes that I really like. There's just a few scenes in this movie that I just adore. And then after he comes back and he apologizes to, he doesn't come back, he was there the whole time, but he apologizes to Sakura's mother for losing his composure and everything. And she's fine with it. She says thank you for giving her such great times and everything. And then as we see him walking home on what is now a very bright sunny day, so it's a new spring almost. And you hear her mother saying, "If you like, I won't force you, but won't you and Kyoko come here and have dinner with us one day?" I think that's pretty cool too, because it shows that they're absolute strangers. Kyoko probably knows her mother pretty well, but Haruki is an absolute stranger to them. But just because he was so close to her daughter, she wants to know him and probably hear the stories and everything about them, which I think is pretty cool too. And then she asks him his name, and this is where we finally hear, it's Haruki, meaning spring tree. Or I actually think we heard it. No, we heard it after. So this is the first time we hear it. He says, "It's Haruki, meaning spring tree." And we see her say, "That's a perfect name to go with Sakura." As she smiles and just kind of accepts that it was awesome that he was the last person that, fell for her and everything. She was probably wished that he could have married her someday and all that, which is pretty sad, but I think she's overall just happy that they got to know each other. And then we see the train scene again when they're going into Hakata City, and we see the scene where he actually says his name, and Sakura says, "We two really are, we're just meant to be, kind of thing." And then we hear the last line she ever says in this movie. I think, this is the last flashback, the last time we see Sakura's voice, the last time we hear her voice ever in this whole movie. And she says, "I'm so glad I reached out to you. Cherry blossoms in spring. It must have been you. I made my choices in life to meet you." And she reverberates as she finishes that last word. Everything just kind of echoes and sinks in as she freezes. The scene pauses and it's just gone. She's done. Sorry, this movie is just, there's a lot to it that I want to unpack. It's such a gorgeous movie. And then we see another one of my favorite scenes. I hate to repeat that so much, but there's so many good scenes in this movie. And this is, we see Haruki standing near a bridge, and he's all by himself, leaning on a railing, reading, facing these sakura trees. And then the next scene, it pans around, and we see Sakura standing next to him, kind of like she's there in spirit with them, because he ate her pancreas. She is living on within him. And she's facing the opposite way, which is interesting too, because they talk about how they're opposites and they face the other way to look at each other. But she's looking off in the distance, and he's watching the Sakuras as he reads a book. And that's a beautiful song there too. I really like the song that plays in that scene. He was playing around on the piano because I was like, oh, I gotta learn this. Didn't do a very good job, but it's a great song. And yeah, that's kind of the closure on all we see from Sakura in this whole movie. And then we cut to Spring Cafe, and we see Haruki sitting in the same chair he was where Sakura died. And that might have just been to save money on animating, but I think that was pretty sad to just see him sit back down in that chair at a similar time too, because it was kind of sunsetting. It's just pretty sad too. But he's sitting there as Kyoko walks in, and she's like, "What do you want?" kind of thing. She doesn't know why he brought her there. And then he shows her the book after a bit, and her voice just kind of softens as she sees that it's Sakura's handwriting. And then Haruki tries to explain why he has the book, what happened and all that, and how she was sick, and he tries to say that even though she was in the wrong place at the wrong time, even if she had lived, she would have died soon. And she cuts him off with this slap to the face. And this is the one I was talking about earlier that I think the sound design is kind of bad on. It might have been on purpose for it to sound so weak, like a wet piece of bread slapping a plate or something. But it's just kind of a weak slap. It might have been on purpose. I won't dig into it too much, but I remember hearing that the first time and being like, ugh, that's not a great sound. And then she starts reading the book. And the music that plays when she reads the book, as she starts to cry and everything, I want to analyze it a bit and just say it sounds so almost childhood-like, with the little plucking of a piano almost going on. I think it was a piano, if I remember correctly. But there's like it sounds like I don't know, it sounds so nostalgic to childhood, like she's remembering how they grew up in junior high together, and she's remembering her friend that she's been with so long since, like, she's probably remembering their childhood this whole time, thinking about growing up with her, and I don't know what she wrote in the letter, but it was probably stuff about her childhood too, I imagine, a lot of it. But the music just makes it feel so much younger, like, because Haruki only met, like, probably a month before she died, or a month or two, I don't know, it doesn't really explicitly tell us, but Kyoko's known her so much longer, and probably knew her better. I don't know if I should say that, because it's such a different type of relationship, and they went through so much different things together, but there's just something between them for that too, that's just almost unspoken when she cries, and the music kind of tells its own story. I love that part. That song itself is just really good on its own. And then after she finishes reading, she asks, like, she says, why did you keep it from me, or why keep it from me? And he goes to say, like, well, she didn't want to tell you, and she said, no, why did you keep it from me? And she talks about, like, how if he had told her, she would have quit school and spent more time with her and everything. And this again gets into, like, everyone doesn't know when they're gonna die. Nobody here knows exactly when they're gonna die, ever, unless they're, I can't think of too many examples. My voice, I'm sorry. But, like, really, no one knows when they're gonna die, and yeah, you can't, even if you do know, you don't want to quit school and stuff just to spend time, like, it's just, we're all on a time limit. No one knows when they're dying, and we need to savor what we have. Like, she's probably regretting not spending more time with her. And I think no matter when someone dies, we're always going to think there was more time we could have spent with them. And that's that's something that she's really driving home in that scene, I think. So that was a pretty sad to hear as well. Fuck, I'm losing my voice, I'm sorry. Anyways, so Sakura says, like, I'll never forgive you for not telling me. And she leaves and walks off. And then Haruki kind of thinks for a second. And I think this moment kind of shows how he's thinking, and he thinks, what would Sakura do, I think, is what he's imagining. And then he chases after her, and he says, wait, I'm sorry, but even if not at once, I want you to forgive me. And if one day you're able to forgive me, I'd like you to. And then she stops walking suddenly. Like, she just stops mid-stride. And there's a little pause. And he says, becomes friends with me. And then the credits roll. And I think that was a really cool ending, too. Because that shows that he's finally asked someone to be his first friend. Because he never really asked, he never asked Sakura to be his friend. They don't refer to each other as friends. They are something for sure, but we never really hear what. But this is his first, I'd say, like, official friend that he ever makes. Which is ironic, because she's the one that, hates him all movie. That always says, like, I don't know, she's just so aggressive and defensive. You'd think he'd become friends with someone like Gumboy right away, because he's so kind and easy to be friends with. But he befriends, or tries to befriend Kyoko immediately, which I think is just very interesting. And then, of course, I don't know if you've seen this, so if you haven't, there's an after credits scene. So I did, because I sat there listening to the music thinking for a good while before it popped up. I was like, oh, there's more. But if you missed that, pause the podcast or stop it or something, and I'd say go watch it, because I'm going to discuss it, and I'm going to spoil it. But there is an after credits scene, and it's pretty gorgeous. It's only like, I think, 3 minutes long or something, but it tells a lot, and it gives us another view. Because here's the spoilers. It's 1 year later, so we see this really well framed scene, I'm gonna say, where Haruki is by the grave and he's saying, "You know how I am, so I'd like to start off by complaining. It wasn't as easy as you made it seem. Being with people is really difficult. So it took a whole year, and then, bam, the scene pops out and you see Kyoko standing beside him." And they're both at the grave, paying their respects to Sakura. And I think that's a really good way to introduce that, because it seems like he's just on his own, spending alone time with Sakura like he always did. But no, this time he's there with a friend. He's there with Kyoko, and they're both visiting Sakura like it's kind of a friend group moment. Because they never got to hang out with friends. Like, Sakura wanted the three of them to go to the cafe and stuff together. They always talked about that. But they never really got to hang out with the three of them. I don't think ever, really. Except for maybe if you count, like, being in class, and if you count the what's it called? Sweet's Paradise, where she comes in and, yells at him. But that's the only times we really see the three of them in one place. So this is kind of an interesting moment to see. It's almost like the three of them bonding, even though Sakura's a gravestone, and they're just kind of hanging out with her and paying their respects, which I think it was a pretty pretty scene to see there. Pretty. But then, he continues and says, "But we've finally come this far. 1 year ago, I made the decision to become like you, someone able to acknowledge others and to love others. You are no longer here. I'll learn to stand on my own 2 feet. Well, see you later." And then, like, Kyoko leaves a bit earlier than him. And he turns and says, "Let's be happy, the two of us." And she's like, "What are you saying? You coming all this way to Sakura's grave just to confess to me? You're disgusting." Like, I don't think she was being serious. I think she was kind of joking around, And he says, "Please, I meant it in a wider sense." And she does this little noise where she sounds kind of disappointed. I don't think she was. There's a lot that leads to that she didn't care about him that way. But she doesn't do this. And then she tosses gum to him, and he thanks her. And it's like, wait a minute. I've seen gum before in this movie. So, he asks if she's taken a liking to gum recently, or if she likes gum. And she's like, "I've taken a liking to it recently." And he goes, "Huh, so that's how it is." Because, he knows what gum means too. He knows my boy, Gumboy. And she says, "Well, we won't start dating till after the entrance exams." And he says, "Well, I'm sure that'll make him motivated to study for the exams too." Which is interesting, because I think Kyoko and Gumboy, I'd like to see them in the next movie, in the sequel. I don't know when it takes place and stuff, but I do hope they're in it, because they probably have a pretty funny relationship with old ass kicker and Gumboy, But as Haruki starts to walk away, the music is playing, and it just stops suddenly, it's a very sudden stop, I found, as a sakura blossom floats by his face, and he, whips his head around, he snaps to it, and he sees the grave, and then the music starts to fade back in. And it's worth noting there's no sakura trees in sight, so this is this blossom came a long way away to get to him, which makes me think that, I think it's just so poetic. It's like one blossom, kind of like how there was one rose and one sakura, So he looks at the grave for a bit, and then he smiles and he turns around, And Kyoko says, "What are you spacing out for? Let's go to Sakura's place already." Which is great because that means they went to go have dinner with the family like they wanted to. Now this could be the first time they do that, but I like to think that they did it a few times and that they just do it every year as well. So maybe this is just a tradition that they go and they see her parents every year, but I think they did dinner with them a few times, just to bond and talk about Sakura together. And then he says this line. He says, "You're right. Sakura's waiting for us," because they talk about eating pancreases, not in the gory way, and how she probably lives on within all of them, especially Haruki, I'd say, because he changed the most. He became such a different character throughout the story. But she probably also lives on in other people. We didn't see her relationship to her parents very much, or her relationship with Kyoko all that much. So she probably, like, that room of all four of them or whatever, I think she has a brother actually as well, so five of them, all eating together and talking and stuff is probably just, it's like Sakura being there with all of them, with all the pieces of little pieces of Sakura in everyone in one place. I think that's pretty cool to think about too. But as that happens, we see the Sakura blossom. I don't really know how to pronounce that word, so I'm sorry if I've been saying it wrong this whole time. We see the blossom resting on her gravestone, just for a few seconds before the movie ends, which I think is like a very interesting, just way to show it too. It's a really simplistic, nice last scene. I don't really know how to say it, but like there's so many more complex scenes that I really like throughout the movie of just settings and stuff that look so good and really good composition between characters and things. But this one scene is just so simplistic, yet it just tells such a story, knowing after the movie like what everything represents and how the blossom is her and everything. It's a pretty heavy picture to look at for a few seconds, and then the movie ends. So I love that movie. I'm going to talk about a few themes before I get into The Little Prince. We're already at 2.5 hours, by the way, which I didn't think I could talk to a microphone for that long in a room, but it's a good movie. It gets me thinking. I've been thinking about this for a long time. So, but the first thing I want to talk about is pacing. So, I think every scene in this movie was necessary. Every scene felt so deliberate and important. Like when I went through and took notes, I had, I think, 32 pages originally of just notes that I had to condense down, which I didn't condense too much because I still have a ton of them. You've probably heard me rustle papers a lot. But every scene in this movie felt so important in some ways, for just character design, for plot, for everything. It just all felt like it needed to be there, which was very good use of time, I'll say. Everything felt important. And it didn't seem like there was any filler, which I think in some movies filler is fine, and there might have been some in here that I missed. But even in good movies that do filler well, it's still like something that you might forget about, I find. It's like, oh yeah, that happened, didn't it? This movie, I can't think of a single thing that was filler. Now, I want to mention that the first half of the movie before she died seemed to race by a lot. Like I think it was about an hour before she died, maybe an hour and 10 minutes, something like that, 50 minutes. It was really fast though. It went by so quickly, which I think personally, like, it could have been a TV show. They could have had every episode be different things and have all the deaths and stuff or have the death in one episode, have an episode for closure. But the way they did it with the movie, I think works so well because it shows just how fleeting life is, how life goes by so fast and then it's gone in an instant. She snaps out of existence. She's stabbed and killed and dead, and it's just gone. And I think that really shows how short life is when they have that first part go by so fast. Like, when you think about it, it's still half a movie, which is a lot, but having one of your two main characters die that fast and still having the movie work out is just great writing. Really good writing. And I think at the same time when they killed her halfway, it works out because we get not much time to actually see her. We get enough to love her before she dies and stuff. But then we also get so much time to spend on closure after, which I think was really important with this show. Because some shows, they kill a character off and it's sad and they leave you with that. And that works out sometimes. It's supposed to be sad. But with this, they kill her off, but they also don't want it to be a sad movie. they don't want you to cry. Well, they might want you to cry, but they don't want you to be depressed after watching. They want you to think of how important life is, but they also want you to think like this guy changed. Sure, she died. She's gone, and that sucks. That's terrible, but that's part of life. And it talks about how through it, she lived a long, like, she may not have lived long, but she did so much in life. She changed this man completely, and she changed so many others. As we saw at her funeral, there were so many people there that she changed people, and she did a lot with her short life, and she lived it to the fullest, and that's very well shown with how long they spend on her even after she's dead in this movie. Now I will say, since the closure went on for so long, it did kind of feel like there was like multiple endings. Like it felt like it ended when she died, and then it felt like it ended when they read the book, and then it felt like they ended when they went to the grave. It felt like they ended when he made friends with Kyoko. It just felt like they kind of ended, and then like, but there's more, and then ended, and then they were like, but there's more. Which it could have been annoying for some people. It was annoying for me when I was note taking, but I really think even then, like all of it was necessary, and I really liked that we got all of that closure at the ending. I just thought I'd mention it because I think some people thought it dragged on. I definitely didn't. I liked it a lot, but I could see how people could think that. Now, one thing I didn't really mention in this podcast at all, I don't think yet, is that I can really relate to Sakura as a character because I was born with a terminal illness and was not expected to live a very long life for a while. Now, I was born with it, so I didn't have to suddenly come to terms with, I'm going to die within years, like Sakura was. But at the same time, I've always kind of known throughout my life that I probably won't live as long a life as most people. Now, thanks to medical advancements, I'm probably going to live to like 40 or 60 is what they're estimating these days. But like, coming to terms with that, there was like, I was born with it, so it wasn't a big deal. But there was years where I kind of really realized what that meant as I grew up. And I think I can kind of feel how she felt when she realizes my life is going to end someday. Like I am going to die and become a memory. And she realizes that, and she says she's scared of it, which, everyone's scared of it, I think, at least a little bit. Because it's the unknown, and, no one's, even if you believe in stuff and you have a god and everything, you still don't know what it's going to look like exactly. So I think everyone's at least a little bit scared of just the mystery aspect, because the unknown is one of the scariest things out there. So I think that's one of the reasons this show just stood out to me so much, is because I can relate to her character and that acceptance, as well as I know people who have been, diagnosed with things like that before and who are on a time limit, and hearing that in a movie and stuff, it's like I've seen people compare it to what's that movie called? I actually have it on my shelf here. I think The Fault in Our Stars. Yeah, I haven't seen the movie, but I read the book. Really good book, actually. I liked it a lot. But it's a common thing they talk about in shows now, because there's so many medical advancements these days that people are getting those diagnoses that they're going to die because we don't have those advancements yet, but we can tell you that you're going to because we have that, and we can make it easier and hurt less and stuff, like she mentions in the movie. But that's a new kind of genre we've seen as of late, is stories about people knowing they're going to die and then dying. But this one, I feel like it just stands out so much and has such a twist with the stabbing happening early. It just makes it feel so sudden, which we don't get in those other ones, or at least we don't get to that extent. And it just felt so much more real with the way they did the dialogue, and I think it was just the best execution of that type of plot I've ever seen, as well as they threw in so many other twists that we didn't get in other movies. Now, there's one, it's a bit of a paragraph, and I think I've mentioned it before in this podcast, but one thing I want to say is one of the morals of the story, kind of, that she really tries to drive home at the beginning, and that is, don't you have things you want to do before dying too? Yet you're not doing them right now, even though you never know if you'll drop dead tomorrow. That's true for me and just as much for you. And then this is the thing right here. Every day is worth the same as any other. What I did or didn't do today doesn't change its worth. And then she says, I have fun doing normal stuff just like this, as she's in the library with them. And now I want to say that, like, if you're out there listening to this, first of all, thank you, I appreciate it. But don't take life for granted. People are dying every second of every day, and we never know when that'll be our second, you know? Um, and that doesn't mean, go and waste all your money at a casino and then go on a trip to Hawaii and then go broke and then live homeless. And stuff. I'm not saying that. I'm saying, like her, live every day like a normal day, but at the same time, know that it could be your last, and don't let it go to waste. You can do normal stuff while still enjoying it. You can go to work and make the most of it. Don't let yourself be upset for a long time. Don't dwell on things that make you angry. It's just a really good moral that I think really stuck with me after this movie. And I've been, I think I watched this movie about 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago, and I've been taking notes and stuff since then. But I've felt like every day since then just feels so much more important. Not to date my content or anything, whatever, I don't care about that. But it is currently quarantine. It's started July. I'm still quarantined here. And it's like, it does feel like every day blends together, and it feels like a lot of days are wasted because you don't do much. Like, you stay home, you get up, at some point you eat breakfast for lunch because it's so late in the day. Like, personally at least, I'm not doing much these days. I started working out, but that's all I really do in the day. Other than that, I spend time watching watching anime, which, not a waste of time in my opinion, and doing stuff like that. But I still try to make every day feel like it's important, because if I die tonight in my sleep or something, I want to know that I did something today. Or if I choke on a chicken bone or something like that, I want to know that it was a good piece of chicken. You know what I'm saying? Anyways, I want to talk about that for a bit, but I also want to talk about a bit of the character development. Now, I mentioned a lot that Haruki gets a lot of it, so I'm probably going to talk about him a good bit. But I think him making friends with Kyoko is just, like, very interesting that she was one of the first ones he made friends with, or is alluded to be. It might not be, but he's the first one he tried, at least, because, she was still pretty pissed at him. But I can see why it took a year, because they're so different, too. Like, he was opposites with Sakura, but Kyoko, I think he's pretty opposites with, too. She's, she's aggressive, she's defensive, she talks very, like, in an angry tone, it seems, almost all the time, even with her friends and stuff. We saw with Sakura, she's always like, don't do that, Sakura, you're gonna, you can't date him, blah, blah. Because she's so defensive and stuff, and, that's a person that you have to get used to. That's that's a personality that a lot of people, if you're making friends with them, it might take a while to get used to and to realize, okay, that's just the way they are. They're not angry at me. They're just, that's how they talk, And then on the other side, Haruki is so quiet and reserved, and he's one of the biggest things is he's unconfrontational, and she is very confrontational, I'd say. So she probably got angry at him a lot, and he's like, doesn't say anything. Like when she warns him about getting close to Sakura, she's yelling at him, and she's like, say something back or respond, or like stuff like that. And he's just sitting there all quiet because he doesn't know what to say. And that's something that was probably so hard for them to come to terms with as friends, because they're so different in that way. And then I also want to talk about, like, we don't see it, but we start to see Haruki become friends with Gumboy. Like, we see him take the gum, and that's it, really. But I like to think that after that, in between the year, he probably got to know Gumboy, like, through Kyoko, as well as Gumboy's so outgoing that he probably talked to him still after Sakura died, and after he took the gum and stuff. I imagine they likely started to get along and probably even became friends, too, after. And then, as I think I already talked about that, but Haruki just gets so much more expressive throughout the movie. He starts to smile more. I think one of the first smiles we see is when he says he did have a good time on the train back, when he's getting off the train from Hakata City, and he smiles. I think that's one of the first times we see him smile, just because he starts to become so much more expressive. But then, like, at the end when he's crying and stuff, and even when he's at the grave, he just feels like such a different person. He does have a new haircut, I'll give him that, and it's much better than his last haircut. But he just is so much more smiley, and he has so much more tone and depth to his voice, where he talks in a more expressive fashion than he used to, for sure. But he changes so much over the movie, and he also seems to get braver too. Like, he's so unconfrontational at the start, but at the end he chases after Kyoko and he asks her to be his friend. which I think is a big sign of him becoming braver and becoming more willing to almost sacrifice to make friends, because that's hard stuff to do, I imagine, especially for a person who's never done it before. To chase after someone and to ask their forgiveness and to make them be their friends when you're like going from that, or from a person who doesn't talk to people to that's got to be hard to do. Yeah, and I think I mentioned it earlier too, but I love that Kyoko's voice stays the same way. She doesn't get kinder to the end, like she doesn't talk softer with Haruki at the end, because that's just her character. Because she probably never was really angry at Haruki until she found out about stuff. Like she was angry at him, but I think she wasn't deeply angered by him at all really throughout the movie. She was just kind of, that's how she expresses herself, and she probably doesn't know how to express herself otherwise. And I think it's good that she didn't change her voice at the end, really, because that's just her tone. That's how she talks. That's how she is, even with her friends. Though she does start to break a bit when Sakura dies, which I think is a very interesting thing, too, to see her shell kind of crack as she finds out about her death, and or not finds out about her death, but finds out that she was sick and that she didn't know and all this, and as she reads it. But I just thought that was interesting. And now I want to also say there's a lot of lessons in this movie. There's a lot of themes kind of going on at once. So there's one I talked about earlier about living each day like it's your last. But there's also, they talk about like cherishing those that are close to you. They talk about how you are your relationships. You are basically a product of your friendships and your love with people around you. And I think that makes it interesting too, to think of how cherishing those next to you makes you worth more. Like, I'm kind of rambling, I think, but it's just, it really makes me think about how I treat people around me. I try to be nice to everyone, everyone does that, I think. But it really shows just how important that is in this movie, how when you're gone, they're not going to remember you, they're going to remember what they did with you, what you did together. They're not going to remember the things you did by yourself. They're going to remember the times you were with other people, So cherish those that are close to you is another big lesson I found. Where is it? There it is. I think one of the other ones is kind of how Sakura and Haruki kind of become like each other. And that's, be content on your own and by yourself, but also be content with others. So I know a lot of us say, oh, I'm an introvert, oh, I'm an extrovert. Personally, I know I talk a lot, I make it a podcast, but I'd say I'm an introvert. I don't talk to people I don't know very often and stuff. And they get into how it's important. They both take a lesson from each other, and it's important to be content with yourself. It's important to realize what people think of you won't matter if they're not important to you. If a bully says your shirt looks dumb, who cares? If a guy says, oh, you watch anime, who cares? Doesn't matter. But people close to you, you do have to care what they think, and that's what Sakura teaches him. You have to care what people think about you, not what you think they think about you, which is what Haruki originally thought. And that's an interesting note as well, I thought, because I find that one I lack a bit in, because I've always not really cared what people thought of me. I didn't get picked on much in school because I didn't react to people like that. Because I just never really cared what people thought of me. And I know that now, like, after watching this, it kind of teaches that it's a little bit important to care what the people close to you think of you. Like, you can say, who cares if this guy thinks my shirt looks dumb? But, like, the people close to you, you want them to think you're nice. Like, I'm not saying fake your personality. Don't do that. But you do need to, don't be like Haruki and ignore them all the time. You want to talk to them. You want to be kind. And you want to be like Sakura, where you take interest in people's lives and you invest in them and you invest time in each other, So it's showing to be content on your own and with yourself and not let people tell you not to be you. But at the same time, it's talking about how you should be open to relationships with others and talking with others and spending time with people and not being by yourself all the time, And I think that's a hard lesson for some people to learn. Like, I think I am good at staying on my own a lot. Like, over quarantine, over quarantine, I haven't really missed going out very much, except for sometimes. But I'm just good at staying home and watching shows and catching up on things, especially after a busy year of school. So I think I could definitely take a lesson investing more time in others after this quarantine's up. Remember, guys, wear your masks and everything. But after quarantine's up, I'm going to have to get back to investing in people's lives and stuff, which might be a hard adjustment, and I think we're all going to have that adjustment issue. But, it's important, so I guess we'll see how that goes. I'll keep you updated. And then another little note that they talk about a bit, it's not a huge theme, is don't judge a book by its cover, which is kind of ironic, seeing as the cover of cover of Living with Dying is pretty bland and stuff. It's a little journal cover, but it's a huge book. It's a very important book to Sakura and the people around her, whereas to others it's probably just a story, Yeah, and that's the same for the characters in the show, though. Whereas, like, they all judge Haruki, oh, he's a creepy kid, he hangs out by himself, he doesn't talk to people. Which, he doesn't talk to people, but he's still got his big personality in himself. He still loves his books, he still enjoys fiction more than reality. And he's probably got tons of stuff we don't hear about him before the movies that are just things that he knows, and he doesn't care to tell other people. He doesn't care to show off about other people, about what he does. I don't know. Just kind of little interesting things like that, as well as don't judge a book by its cover, whereas, like, Sakura's this happy, silly girl, but she's dying, And now I want to talk a little bit about the sequel before I get into the Little Prince stuff. So the sequel, To My Father and to Someone in My Memories, it's called. I'm excited for this, if it ever comes out. I don't really wait for anime to come out these days very often, because they're getting canceled all the time and stuff like that. But I'm really excited for this if it ever comes out, because I think this is going to be pretty interesting. I don't know when it's going to take place. I have a feeling it's going to be when they're older, like when Haruki is older, because it would be maybe his kid or something. But to his father, Haruki's the father, and to someone in his memories might be like he remembers Sakura somehow through his father, how his father acts, is what I'm kind of thinking. It could be something altogether different. Could be maybe Sakura talking to his father, because we didn't really, or her father, because we didn't really see her father very much. So I'm not really sure who this father is. I have a feeling it's got to be Haruki, because I don't know. We didn't really see any other guys. I don't think it would be Gumboy or Takahiro. Actually, it could be Takahiro, maybe from his perspective, to see what we missed from this last movie. But I don't know when it takes place. Don't know what it will be about at all. I really can't speculate much. But I really hope Gumboy and Kyoko are in it, because they're two of my favorite characters, and I really want to see how their relationship pans out. If they say they broke up, I'm going to be pissed, because they're so cute together. No, I just think they'd be really funny. And I'm interested to see if Haruki's in it, and if he has a love interest at that point. If he's moved on from Sakura and is in love with someone else. Kind of hope he doesn't, because I feel like it'd be cool if he's one of those guys that holds on. But at the same time, I think that would be pretty sad, because he's like 17. He's going to live probably another 60, 70 years or something crazy. And, no one wants to do that by themselves. But at the same time, I think it'll be hard if it is a relationship to see someone taking Sakura's place. She's going to have to be pretty special, Or maybe she's like, he's seeing things in her that he saw in Sakura. That'd be kind of interesting too. But I don't know. I'm interested in what the movie will be about. So yeah, I'm excited for that sequel. But now I'd like to talk a bit about The Little Prince. So, if you're only here for the movie, that's cool. I get it. I think there's not too much else that I really have to go over about the movie itself on its own. But if you're curious, I'm gonna summarize The Little Prince and talk about some little graphical things that were similar, and some little story things that were similar, and some character stuff, because I thought a lot of it was just really interesting. It's not hugely important, I don't think, to the story, because you can watch the movie without reading the book, or without reading The Little Prince for sure, and it's still a great story. But I feel like after I read it, there was so much more stuff that got enhanced by knowing this other stuff. So if you're not interested, that's cool. I appreciate you. I appreciate you checking it out and checking out my podcast. And if you made it this far, please let me know how I did, and any feedback would be really appreciated. And I hope you have a great day. So have a good one, dude, or dudette. I say dude, gender neutral, so don't mind that. Anyways, on to The Little Prince. So here's a little summary before I get into it. If you haven't read the book, it's about a pilot who crashes in the desert and he is found by the little humanoid alien, which is the little prince, and he tells him about his adventure. While the pilot is stranded and fixing his aircraft, he listens to the little prince's stories and tales and stuff. And he talks of his original planet where he had one flower, which he misses dearly, which I might talk about the flower a bit later because I think that's a pretty important theme. And he tells a story of how all the people he met on the little planets that he visited on the way to Earth and all the places he's been. And then he talks about a bit of the stuff he discovered on Earth, like this fox, which is a very interesting theme that I want to talk about as well. And as he meets the prince is on his way back to where he originally landed on Earth 1 year before. Because I don't want to spoil anything from that story, actually, and I don't think it's too important. But he's on his way to where he landed before. So now the first thing is something I mentioned earlier, and that's the planet. The little planet scene, the sequence where Sakura and Haruki are on their planets, is very reminiscent of the planets from The Little Prince. I don't think we ever see 2 in 1 scene in The Little Prince, whereas we see like 8 in 1. I think 6 plus hers or something like that, so 7, I guess, in one scene in that movie. But those planets are very reminiscent in their size. They're very small planets, and they feel a lot like that one because they're definitely based off of it. I don't think it was colored like Sakura's was in The Little Prince. I think it was more like the gray one that Haruki is standing on, which could mean something, but I don't think that's too important to the story. And then there's another thing they mention a lot more in the books than we do that we see in this, or in The Little Prince than we see in the Pancreas. And that is, we see for one scene that she's walking towards the sunset as the moon rotates. So she's like she's staying in the same position watching the sun, but the moon is spinning underneath her like a treadmill, kind of. And that talks about like, the Little Prince loves watching sunsets, and he's like, oh, can we see a sunset? And the pilot's like, yeah, in 8 hours or something. And he says, on your tiny planet, all you had to do was move the chair a few feet, and you could watch the twilight whenever you wanted to. Whereas on Earth, you have to wait for it. So that showed her chasing her own sunset and watching it like the Little Prince did, which was very interesting, I thought. And then, she tends to this flower plant tree thingy, a lot like the Little Prince tends to his rose, which just shows up one day. And that's significant to him because on his planet, all he has is, I think, 2 volcanoes. They're very small. And one of them is inactive or something, or 3 and one's inactive. And he has little baobab trees that grow that you have to pluck because otherwise they take over your planet and they're like giant and they ruin everything. So he just takes care of plucking them and cooking his food on those, and it has furniture apparently. He has a chair, I think. But it's a really small little planet. But one day a rose grows and he takes care of it and it talks to him and stuff. And then Sakura takes care of this flower much like he took care of the rose. He puts up a little wind wall thingy, I don't know what it's called, barrier to stop the wind because the flower complains about it at one point. He covers her with a glass bulb so that she doesn't get cold at night, and he waters her and everything. Just like we see Sakura doing to her flower. So again, I talked about it a bit earlier, but I don't know what the flower represents yet, or the plant that she tends to in our movie, in Pancreas. I think it could be her own life or her relationship with Haruki is my biggest thought. I think it's their relationship that they built together, and she's like tending it to it and watering it. Because like as we hear with the Little Prince, he talks about how my flower is important because it's the one I've watered, is one quote he says, I think. I think that's kind of their relationship, is my thoughts. I'm not certain about that, of course. And then, she flies around from planet to planet like the Little Prince did. And then one thing I noticed that I was actually really surprised I didn't notice earlier that's kind of interesting is Sakura's outfit when she is in that little celestial scene is very different from anything she's worn in this movie. Like, she wears the uniform a lot, the school uniform, and then she wears, for a few scenes, some more fancy clothes when she goes out with Haruki to the city and stuff like that. But she never wears anything close to like that pastel green and yellow outfit. And then I looked and I realized, wait a minute, I've seen this somewhere before. And I looked at a picture of the Little Prince, the original drawing or whatever, and he's wearing green with a flowing yellow scarf, I think. And Sakura's dress is green with a flowing yellow band around the middle, and then she has a red bow on her collar, I believe, and the little prince also has a red bow, I think, in the same position, I believe. Yeah, I think it was around the same. Um, but it's just so similar in that sense as well that it's so many little parallels. And now that I'm past, I think I've talked about all the graphical parallels that I've noticed. At least there's probably more out there. Um, there's Oh, and I think I mentioned already, but the planets all have little symbols of every character that they met on there. Anyways, so the story comparisons. I want to get into a little bit of the theming and little plot things that were similar. So, The Little Prince is about opening your heart and quote unquote taming, and how living is about the relationships you make as well. Like he says, my rose all on her own is more important than all of you together, since she's the one I've watered. Is what the Little Prince says when he sees all those roses at one point. Um, and then the fox he meets at one point. He meets a fox that tells him to tame him, or asks him to tame him, and he's like, "What should I tame you? I'm just gonna leave." And he tells him it's worth it and stuff. And this fox at one point says, "It's the time you spend on your rose that makes your rose important." And then they talk about how loving can hurt, like how Haruki probably wouldn't have been hurt if he didn't fall for Sakura before she died, but it was probably worth it, he'd say, in the long run, to fall for her and to learn from her and eat her pancreas and become like her, because he's gained so much as a person since then. And when he tames the fox, they don't go over how or anything. He just, I think they say the little prince hangs out with the fox a bit every day, and that's how you tame it, is by putting time in like that. And then eventually the little prince has to leave, and he says, "It's your own fault. I never wanted to do you any harm, but you insisted that I should tame you." And the fox says, "Yes, of course." And the prince says, "But you're going to weep." And he responds, "Yes, of course." And the prince says, "Then you get nothing out of it," which is just so wrong, as we see. And the fox says, this is a great line, "I get something because of the color of the wheat. Because the wheat is the color of his hair." And he says, he goes on later, this is paraphrasing now, and says that the wheat used to remind him of the people that tend to it and the people that hunt him and everything. And now the wheat will remind him of the color of his friend's hair that he remembers. And I think that's a lot like the Sakura blossoms. Like, Haruki got something out of Sakura because of the color of the blossoms and the name of the blossoms, as well as the other stuff he got from her, the personality, the braveness, the sociability. That's not a word, I don't think. The sociableness, able to be social and stuff. Whatever. I'm sorry, I'm bad at English. Yeah, and I just think that's really interesting on its own there. The sunset. Sorry, I'm looking over my notes real quick. Right, this is a big one, I think. So the little prince, on his last day before he leaves and runs away from the rose, he talks about how he runs away because the rose complains about him too much or something. And he's like, "That's it, I'm out of here." And he leaves. And then he makes his way to Earth eventually. And then he misses the rose. But he talks about how the last day when he took care of everything, he plucked his baobab trees, he cooked something he raked the volcanoes, I think he says he rakes them or something, to make sure they don't erupt. He does all these little daily tasks, and he says, all these familiar tasks seemed very sweet to him on the last morning. And that reminds me of how Sakura says all her tasks are sweet to her, now that she knows she's on a timer, and that they're the last time she might be able to hang out in the library. These little things like that just seem so much more important. And I think that's the same for when I went to a dorm for college last year. And I remember the last time I did dishes in my house, I was like, I hate doing dishes. I've done them all my life. And I've always been like, ugh, gross, dirty dishes, But the last time you do dishes at your house, you're not complaining about it. You're just thinking, I'm never doing this again, am I? I'm going to be leaving. Well, I am going to do dishes, but I'm never gonna do these dishes again. Probably I'll be out of here. I'll be in my own house. Same with vacuuming. I'll never vacuum this room again. You think for a bit. I'm actually back in my parents' house again now that I got quarantined. They kicked us out of residence at college, so I'm here for the summer before I move into my apartment. But all these last tasks on the last day you're there or something, or if you don't know if you're dying, everything just feels so much more important. Everything feels so much more special and familiar. Like, if you're going to school or something, It probably just feels so much more vibrant, I imagine. I've never I've never died before. Spoiler alert. Um, but that's just what I imagine it would feel like, is like moving out or leaving something. My girlfriend and I are long distance, and I remember the last morning waking up and getting dressed and you know getting breakfast and stuff before I had to fly back. It just feels so much different the last morning you're there. Um, but yeah, another line that I want to mention is, I think I said this earlier, but the geographer says we don't. He asks to report on his planet because he's so curious, and he says we have three volcanoes. We have a lot of baobab trees or whatever. He says, oh, and I have a flower. And the geographer says we don't record flowers. And he says, why not? And he says because flowers are ephemeral. And now that's the line I talked about earlier. Life is ephemeral and relationships are ephemeral, but this guy doesn't record them or whatever, but to us, ephemeral is important. We are ephemeral, and everything else in our lives usually is. So why should we care about anything? And that's kind of how Haruki feels. He says he is rich that has few wants at one point because he doesn't care what people think of him, because they could hate him, and that's true. Some people could hate us, some people could love us, but we need to care about the ones that love us, even if they won't always love us or they won't always be with us, because flowers are ephemeral. And that's something I really like, that line. That's after watching and listening to this whole audiobook and stuff, that one line I think really stuck with me. I really like that line, as well as the color of the wheat and the watering of the rose. I like those lines a lot. See, that's the thing, is the book itself, it was pretty slow at points, and it was 2 hours long. It was longer than the movie itself almost, I think. But it had some lines that were just real bangers. They really, really connected with me. But for a lot of it, I also was trying to not fall asleep. But I think it was a worthy watch for the most part. For some of it, it was interesting. Anyways, so yeah, they're both about how like loving can hurt and how opening your heart is dangerous. One thing he says is, you risk tears if you let yourself be tamed, which is another banger line. There's so many in this book. But yeah, I think that's all the important things to mention, other than a bit of a spoiler. So if you do plan on reading it, here's a spoiler. Skip maybe a minute into the future. 3, 2, 1, I'm going to say it. The little prince is bit by a snake and dies because he returned to the one place where he landed and he met a snake. And then a year later he left because he missed his flower. So he dies, and we are led to believe that he went back to his flower. He died, so he probably didn't. But he returned to his flower is what he was saying, because his flower also probably died by then. It didn't get cared for a year. And that's also kind of what happens to Sakura. Is she dies and returns to the planet in the celestial thing. But she finds the flower, she goes away, and then she is stabbed and floats back to it or whatever. In that celestial scene, I don't really think that compares to the actual movie. If you have any thoughts or you disagree or anything, let me know. I'm very curious. But I don't think there's too much that parallels to in the story itself, because she never really leaves Haruki's side, which I think is awesome. So that's all I really have on The Little Prince. And that's all I really have to discuss on the movie itself. So I talked for a bit of a good while. It's been about 3 hours. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope you guys stuck through it to the end and bared with me. I'm sorry about all the stuttering and voice cracks and my stomach being loud and all kinds of stuff that probably disrupted it. I'm not good at this yet. This is my first podcast. I hope to get a lot better at it, and I guess we'll see what happens. But if you guys want another anime movie or a show or something, recommend it by all means. I'm very open to watch new ones. I'm open to rewatch ones I've seen. I have a few in mind that I like to talk about, as well as they just added all the Studio Ghibli movies to Netflix, which I've never seen any of them. So who knows? They might be really good. They might be worth watching. I hear they're really good. So possibly those will be coming in the future. I guess we'll see. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm really thankful for you guys that you made it to the end. If you are, still watching it, I appreciate that a lot. I do value your time, and I realize 3 hours is a lot. So if you're willing to listen to me ramble on for 3 hours, that means a lot to me. I can't really say how much that means. But yeah, if you guys want anything else, recommend it. Stay tuned if you want to see what I have next. I'm not really too sure yet, so I'll probably just watch some good anime movies again until I find one I like, or I'll go back and watch or analyze something like A Silent Voice or Your Name or something, because I really like those two. I compared them a bit this episode. But yeah, I hope you guys have a great day, and remember to cherish it because it could be your last, and even if it isn't, every day is worth the same as the next. So you have a great day.